Chapter 2645. Instigate Zhuwen stood in the air and slashed out with the Thunderfire sword. Instantly, a terrifying thunderfire with the power to burn the heavens blasted into the void, leaving a huge ravine in the starry sky. The ravine was filled with dense thunderfire. The moment the white shadow was struck by the Thunderfire sword, it collapsed and dissipated. Shi Huai let out a muffled groan and couldn't help but retreat as he looked at Zhuowen in horror. Fortunately, Guo Yi reacted quickly and swung his staff. Countless staff shadows fell like rain in front of Zhuowen, blocking Zhuowen's move that was sure to kill Shi Huai. "Don't hold back. Let's deal with him together," Guo Yi said to Shi Huai. His aura burst forth, and the long staff in his hands seemed to come alive. Layer after layer of staff smashed towards Zhuo when in an endless stream. However, they managed to block Zhuowen's powerful attack, causing Zhuowen's attack on Shi Huai to slow down by quite a bit. Shi Huai also came to his senses and immediately took out the token. He activated the power of the token and joined forces with Guo Yi to attack Zhuowen. Zhuowen held his swords with both hands, looking like a god or a demon. When he swung his swords, they could burn the horizon, shatter the earth, and distort the starry sky. At the same time, the sacrificial death sword was shooting arrows from the shadows. Under the control of Zhuowen's powerful spiritual sense, it flew freely, causing Shi Huai and Guo Yi to be in a difficult situation. The two of them were originally at a disadvantage when facing Zhuowen, who wielded two swords. Now, with the addition of the sacrificial death sword, the two of them were naturally at a disadvantage, especially when the sacrificial death sword was controlled by Zhuowen's spiritual sense. It was not the slightest bit inferior to an ordinary heavenly Tao master. This made their hearts sink. They had already overestimated Zhuowen as much as possible, but now that they were fighting, they realized that they had greatly underestimated him. This kid actually had 3 heavenly Tao divine artifacts, and his strength was actually so heaven-defying. Zhuowen, on the other hand, was indifferent. He didn't even use the power of his doppelganger. Instead, he used the divine energy of his main body and his powerful spiritual sense to firmly suppress Shi Huai and Guo Yi. Of course, if he only relied on the divine energy of his main body, it would be impossible for him to be a match for the two of them. However, Zhuowen was able to rely on 3 heavenly Tao grade divine artifacts and his powerful divine sense to suppress the combined forces of Shi Huai and Guo Yi. Of course, if Zhuowen used his doppelganger, he would be able to kill the two of them with a single punch. Of course, the heavenly Tao master's main body. Of the heavenly Tao master's main body, he knew very well that his main body's soul was far more powerful than others of the same level. Even a Tao affirmation expert might not necessarily be a match for his main body. Of Zhuowen, had the heavenly Tao master's main body was of heavenly Tao master Zhuowen's main body. Now it seemed like he didn't just have the strength to fight. He'd even suppressed the joint forces of Shi Huai and Guo Yi. The people in the surroundings were dumbstruck. Zhuowen is too abnormal. He's clearly only at the extremes of life and death, yet he's actually in an invincible position against the joint forces of 2 peak heavenly Tao masters. Moreover, he seems to have the upper hand. Big Brother Zhuo is so strong. Tong Qimei revealed a shocked expression, and then her eyes were filled with admiration. Magatama and Yuezu were completely stunned, and then they were overjoyed when they recovered from their shock. They hadn't expected Zhuowen's strength to be so terrifying. Shi Huai and Guo Yi were clearly the strongest amongst the group, yet they couldn't do anything to Zhuowen even after joining forces. Instead, they were suppressed. It was truly inconceivable. The Region Lord is actually so strong. Many cultivators outside the hall were dumbstruck, and they didn't know how to express their feelings at this moment. Are they really from the 8 great heavens? Is he really at the extremes of life and death? He's at the extremes of life and death that even Shi Huai and Guo Yi couldn't do anything to. He's heaven-defying. All the experts around the stone stele were dumbstruck, and they were in an uproar of disbelief. The woman in the Cheongsam watched this scene while her ample bosom rose and fell, and it carried a unique charm. How formidable! How could he be so formidable? She muttered slightly. The steel giant stood silently beside the woman in the Cheongsam, silently watching everything in front of him. He did not say a word, as if he had already guessed that this would happen. Suddenly, countless sword images swiftly slashed out from Zhuowen's hands. Shi Huai and Guo Yi's expressions changed slightly, and they couldn't help but retreat repeatedly. Just as the two of them retreated, a silent shadow took advantage of the gap between the two of them and stabbed towards Shi Huai's forehead. Shi Huai reacted swiftly and immediately dodged to the side. The phantom pierced through Shi Huai's shoulder blade, causing blood to spray as it pierced through Shi Huai's shoulder. Guo Yi's expression changed greatly, and he swung the long staff in his hand, smashing the sneak attack of the Death Sacrifice sword away. The Death Sacrifice sword didn't continue to attack after its successful attack, but instead fled into the starry sky like a viper, waiting for its next prey. Seeing the Death Sacrifice sword disappear, Guo Yi and Shi Huai felt a headache coming on. After the battle earlier, they were actually not afraid of Zhuo when they joined forces. However, the main reason they were at a disadvantage was because of the strange and unpredictable sacrificial death sword's continuous sneak attacks, causing the two of them to be exhausted from running for their lives. Therefore, it was able to succeed. As long as they could suppress the Death Sacrifice sword, the two of them wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Everyone who is willing to fight side by side with us. This boy is too arrogant, actually ignoring us. As cultivators from Xianmi Heavenly Domain, how can we be bullied by a cultivator from such a low-level heavenly domain? Shi Huai suddenly said to the other cultivators behind the stone stele. Guo Yi also hurriedly said, "Everyone, don't worry. As long as you can help us kill this boy, you will gain the friendship of my Broken Valley and Sky Crane Abode. Moreover, we have the authority to let you enter the Broken Valley and Sky Crane Abode to cultivate for a period of time." Originally, everyone snorted at Shi Huai's words, but Guo Yi's words completely moved them. The only difference between a Taoist sect level force and a normal sect level force was that a Taoist sect level force could set up their own Taoist sect in the Xianmi Heavenly Domain and trigger the Heavenly Tao rules. Under the Taoist sect level force, a powerful Heavenly Tao dragon vein would form. Because of the Heavenly Tao dragon vein, the disciples of a Tao sect level force could cultivate much faster than ordinary forces. Chapter 2646. Fear and trepidation. Although Guo Yi and Shi Huai were not particularly important figures in their respective factions, they at least had a certain level of authority. It was still possible for them to give them preferential treatment and fight for a period of time to enter their factions to cultivate. Moreover, this kind of thing was actually something that many Taoist-level factions had. It was just that some Taoist-level factions' disciples did it very secretly, and the higher-ups simply did not know. Moreover, even if they knew, as long as there were no major changes, they would probably not care. After all, the Heavenly Tao dragon vein belonged to their Taoist-level factions. It was endless, and it was very difficult to exhaust it. Guo Yi's promise was truly related to their interests, so they really could not refuse. One had to know that there was a huge difference between cultivating in an ordinary place and on the Heavenly Tao dragon vein. Brother Guo must be joking. We are all cultivators of the Xianmi Heavenly region, so we should help each other. That's right. A mere life and death stage cultivator from the 8 great heavenly regions dares to be so arrogant with just 3 heavenly Tao level artifacts. Today, we will teach this arrogant brat a good lesson on behalf of Brother Shur and Brother Gua. The people who were originally hesitating left the stone, steal one after another, and rushed towards Shur Huai and Gua Yi. Soon, they surrounded Shur Huai and Gua Yi. The people around the stone tablet quickly left, leaving only the Qipao woman and the steel giant standing not far away, unmoved by Gua Yi's words. You guys are so despicable. You can't win, so you plan to gang up on him? Tong Chimei's pretty face changed slightly, and could not help but criticize. Magatama and Yuezu were also extremely angry. Shur Huai and the others could not be bothered with Tong Chimei's criticism. Instead, they coldly looked at Zhuowen. Brat, I underestimated you. However, no matter how strong you are, how strong can you be? Today, I will kill you here. Shur Huai's eyes were gloomy as he looked at Zhuowen, revealing traces of killing intent. Just now, the sacrifice death sword had pierced through his shoulder blade, causing him to lose all face. His killing intent towards Zhuowen was boundless. Zhuowen looked at the group of people in front of him indifferently, the corner of his mouth curling into a cold smile. I think it's best if you guys don't participate in the battle between me and these two, otherwise you will regret it. Ha ha, are you kidding me? Right now, you're already a fish on the chopping board. What qualifications do you have to be arrogant with us? Regret? Do you really not understand the current situation? A cultivator sneered at Zhuowen, his eyes full of mockery. Unfortunately, as soon as this cultivator finished speaking, a shadow suddenly swept towards the back of this cultivator's head like a poisonous snake. By the time the cultivator realized what was happening, it was already too late. The phantom pierced through the back of his head, causing blood to splatter everywhere. His head exploded, and he died on the spot. Whoosh! The surrounding cultivators scattered, not daring to get close to this cultivator. Only then did they realize that the one who had suddenly killed this cultivator was a gray divine sword. It was Zhuowen's sacrificial death sword. How dare you? Gua Yi roared. He took a step forward and smashed out his long stick. Countless stick shadows emitted blazing golden light. It was as if countless small suns had exploded. It was extremely terrifying. Kill. The moment Gua Yi moved, Shur Huai also took out his token and followed closely behind Gua Yi. The other cultivators also blasted out their own attacks. All kinds of dazzling lights exploded in the air around Zhuowen. It was extremely terrifying. Seeing this scene, the Chongsam woman could not help but shake her head. Zhuowen's strength was indeed terrifying. Although he was only at the two extremes of life and death, he was able to suppress Shur Huai and Gua Yi so ruthlessly. But now it was not just Shur Huai and Gua Yi. There were more than 40 people, and all of them were heavenly Tao masters. This was a terrifying force. No matter how powerful Zhuowen was, it was destined that 2 fists would not be able to fight against 4 hands. Unless Zhuowen was a true primordial Tao expert. But if Zhuowen was really a primordial Tao expert, Shur Huai and Gua Yi would definitely have been able to crush him and not be in a stalemate with him. Not necessarily. Steel Plume said again. The Chongsam woman was too lazy to pay attention to Steel Plume's words. With such a lineup, it was obvious that Zhuowen was going to die. Steel Plume actually still had hope for Zhuowen. This made the Chongsam woman slightly disappointed in Steel Plume. Zhuowen's eyes were bloodthirsty. He looked at the surrounding cultivators with a murderous aura. Zhuowen took a step forward and slashed out 2 swords with both hands. Shur Huai and Gua Yi were forced to retreat. Shur Huai and Gua Yi's expressions changed greatly. They felt that Zhuowen's strength seemed to have become stronger than before. Could it be an illusion? Puchi! The moment Shi Huai and Guo Yi were forced to retreat, Zhuowen suddenly threw out two swords. The Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword shuttled out like lightning. In an instant, the two closest cultivators were forced to retreat. Zhuowen took a step forward and arrived in front of the cultivator in the front. He threw out a punch. The moment the punch was thrown out, the aura in his body gradually woke up like a sleeping beast. Boom! The sound of an explosion was heard. Immediately, the cultivator was blasted into a mist of blood by Zhuowen's punch. At the same time, Zhuowen's empty left hand grabbed out in the air and grabbed onto the right arm of the cultivator on the left that intended to launch a surprise attack against him. And then he suddenly squeezed and actually tore off this person's left arm, slaughtering Dao Finger. After killing one and injuring another, Zhuowen made a gesture with both hands. Suddenly, the surrounding energy of the Way of Heaven gathered and finally formed a terrifyingly huge finger. He threw it behind him. The three cultivators who wanted to sneak up on him were immediately blasted into powder by the slaughtering Dao Finger. The slaughtering Dao Finger was definitely one of Zhuowen's trump cards. It was clearly said that this divine ability could kill the master of the Way of Heaven if it was cultivated to the peak. Now that Zhuowen's original body and doppelganger had combined, the slaughtering Dao Finger was extremely terrifying. It was naturally easy to kill the master of the Way of Heaven. In just an instant, 4 people were killed and 1 was seriously injured. Everyone was shocked. Unfortunately, Zhuowen did not give them time to be shocked. He took a step forward and completely displayed the power of the Pangu's sacred body. He rushed into the crowd like a tiger in a flock of sheep. Unexpectedly, not a single cultivator was able to block Zhuowen's attack. The strength of these cultivators was far inferior to that of Shi Huai and Guo Yi. Although they were also masters of the Way of Heaven, they were only at the early stage of the Way of Heaven. They were at the same level as the skinny man who had been seriously injured by Zhuowen. In front of the Pangu's sacred body, they were no different from weaklings. The battle between more than 40 masters of the Way of Heaven and Zhuowen, who was only at the two extremes of life and death, should have been a one-sided battle. However, in the end, they were crushed. The woman in the Cheongsam was dumbfounded. She looked at the scene in disbelief. She felt that what she was seeing now was the most absurd thing she had ever seen. More than 40 masters of the Way of Heaven were being slaughtered like weaklings in front of the two extremes of life and death. This was too terrifying and abnormal. As for Shi Huai and Guo Yi, they had already quietly retreated when Zhuowen had unleashed his full strength. They were trembling with fear. At this moment, Zhuowen was simply the most terrifying devil god. He was like a completely different person compared to the Zhuowen who had fought with them before. What's going on? Has this man been hiding his strength all this time? Why is he so terrifying? Shi Huai trembled and said in a daze, Chapter 26:47, Defeat the enemy, attack. Shi Huai's eyes were filled with hatred. As soon as Guo Yi finished speaking, he flew out with the token in his hand, intending to fight Zhuowen to the death. Guo Yi followed closely behind. The Tao inscriptions on the surface of the long rod in his hand began to emit a dazzling light. Obviously, Guo Yi was also going all out. At this moment, nearly half of the 40-plus practitioners in the field had been killed by Zhuowen. The rest of the practitioners were terrified and no longer dared to attack Zhuowen. They retreated to the periphery of the battle and watched the scene in horror. Shi Huai and Guo Yi also rushed over at this moment. The aura on their bodies had swelled to the peak. It was as if two invisible angry dragons were wrapping around them, carrying a shocking might. Hiss! Shi Huai and Guo Yi held their respective divine artifacts and turned into two swift streaks of light, breaking through the sky. The explosive sounds in the air made the listeners want to cover their ears and scream hysterically. Everyone was paying attention to the streamers that Shi Huai and Guo Yi had turned into. They could see that Guo Yi and Shi Huai were going all out. This attack was more terrifying than any of their previous attacks. It was enough to kill any heavenly Dao master in an instant. Even a Dao Yuan master would not be able to escape. Shi Huai and Guo Yi are burning their blood essence. They're going all out. Not far away, the woman in the Cheongsam frowned slightly. The combat strength of two peak heavenly Dao masters who were burning their blood essence was extremely terrifying. It was comparable to an ordinary Dao Yuan master. Even Steel Plume would not choose to face Shi Huai and Guo Yi's desperate attacks head-on. Thinking of this, the woman in the Cheongsam rolled her beautiful eyes and could not help but look at the white-clothed young man. She knew that the white-clothed young man would choose to retreat. After all, Shi Huai and Guo Yi's desperate attacks were very powerful. Not only the woman in the Cheongsam, but the others also had the same thought. They did not believe that Zhuowen would really dare to face this attack head-on. Of course, they also knew that once Zhuowen chose to retreat, he would face the continuous attacks of Shi Huai and Guo Yi. At that time, the advantage that Zhuowen originally had would disappear in this retreat. But soon, Zhuowen's next move shocked everyone. Zhuowen slowly turned around and looked indifferently at the two streamers that were rushing towards him. Then he stomped his feet on the ground, clenched his right hand into a fist, and punched out. This punch was simple, without any fancy moves. It didn't even have the aura of Rinha Daoist rhyme. This guy, he actually chose to fight head-on. Is he crazy? The Cheongsam woman's pupils shrank as she almost exclaimed out loud. She looked at Zhuo when in disbelief. An uproar broke out in the surroundings when the two streamers, and with their imposing auras, the two streamers dong. At the moment of the collision, it was as if the world was silent. Then everyone was shocked to find that above the starry sky, a violent energy crazily erupted. That energy was like an erupting volcano, becoming gorgeous and colorful in the sky. As for the berserk energy, it swept out in an unparalleled manner. Like an invisible ripple, it quickly spread out. The 20 cultivators closest to it all let out a muffled groan, spat out a mouthful of blood, and retreated in a sorry state. Even the woman in the Cheongsam, who was a little far away, frowned slightly. The moment the aftershock spread, she had to retreat a distance under the protection of the Steel Plume. Bang! Bang! Two strange sounds resounded. Then, everyone was shocked to find that Shi Huai and Guo Yi were sent flying backwards in an extremely sorry state, and the divine artifacts in front of the two of them were actually shattered. In the opposite direction of the two flying backwards, the white-clothed young man stood in the air like a rock. His eyes were calm, like an ancient well without ripples. Whoosh! Shi Huai and Guo Yi, who were still struggling in the air, suddenly felt a chill in their chests. Then, their bodies fell down involuntarily. The two of them found that in front of their chests there was a divine sword piercing through each of their chests. Thump! The two divine swords seemed to have the strength of 10,000 pounds, nailing the two of them to the ground. No matter how they struggled, they could not break free. The two divine swords were, of course, the Thunderfire sword and the Blood Immortal sword. Zhuowen's face was calm, but his heart was filled with excitement. Just now, when he chose to fight with Shi Huai and Guo Yi head-on, he silently mobilized the power of the Pangu's sacred body. He wanted to see how powerful the Pangu's sacred body was after it was promoted to 2 stars. In the end, What surprised Zhuowen was that the power of the Panga's sacred body was far beyond his expectations. Not only did it resist the desperate attacks of Shi Huai and Guo Yi, but it also shattered their divine artifacts. Zhuowen landed beside Shi Huai and Guo Yi. With a wave of his sleeve, he took off their spiritual rings. The remaining 20 practitioners who were besieging Zhuowen were too scared to move forward. More than 40 people had besieged him, and nearly half of them had been killed by this person. Furthermore, he had fought with his life on the line against Shi Huai and Guo Yi, shattering their divine weapons and defeating them. What kind of monstrous genius was this? If they still went against this person, they would be digging their own graves. Shi Huai and Guo Yi glared at each other, both shocked and angry. Do you know who the force behind us is? We are all from a Taoist force. Even in the Xian Mi heavenly territory, it is a powerful force. How about this? We were wrong before. Now, let's remove the stone tablet immediately. Then, we will write off the grudge between us, Shi Huai said coldly. Guo Yi looked at Zhuowen coldly. He knew that since the white-clothed young man in front of him knew about the heavenly law origin crystal, he must know something about the Xianmi heavenly territory. He should know what a Taoist force represented. After knowing that they were from a Taoist force, they felt that the white-clothed young man in front of them should be afraid. After all, the white-clothed young man was indeed powerful, but he was only from the 8 heavens. How could he have any backing? If he killed them, he would completely offend the 2 Taoist forces, Po Valley and Sky Crane House. Although the 2 of them were only inner disciples in Po Valley and Sky Crane House, they were still the representatives of the 8 heavens. If they died in the 8 heavens, even Po Valley and Sky Crane House would not let it go. Chapter 2648. Fire Plume. However, we can help you settle this. Shi Huai said calmly. He could feel the hostility in Zhuowen's eyes, so he threw out such conditions, hoping that Zhuowen would know the severity of the situation. Unfortunately, as soon as Shi Huai finished speaking, Zhuowen slammed his palm on his forehead. Shi Huai's eyes were wide open, and he died with remaining grievances. Guo Yi looked at the dead Shi Huai. His calm eyes were suddenly filled with panic and fear. This was the fear of death. He did not expect that the white-clothed young man in front of him would kill Shi Huai without thinking about the consequences. Write it off. If it was before all of you made a move, I really wouldn't want to cause trouble. Unfortunately, all of you wanted to join forces to kill me, and even turned my Wenshui palace into a mess. Do you think that just writing it off will be enough? Zhuowen sneered. I will compensate you. Please spare me, Guo Yi said hurriedly. Just use your lives as compensation. Zhuowen's right index finger and middle finger formed a sword and pointed at Guo Yi's forehead. A powerful spiritual sense storm instantly ground Guo Yi's soul to nothingness the moment Shi Huai and Guo Yi died. The surroundings were silent. It was so quiet that it was terrifying. Among them, the 20 cultivators who had besieged Zhuowen were trembling and fell into a deathly silence. Come here. Zhuowen pointed at the 20 cultivators, and a powerful killing intent firmly locked onto them. The 20 cultivators felt bitter in their hearts. They knew that under the lock of this killing intent, they simply couldn't escape unless they broke this killing intent. However, breaking this killing intent meant going against Zhuowen, and their end would most likely be the same as Shi Huai and Guo Yi. The 20 cultivators obediently came before Zhuowen. They lowered their heads and did not say a word. Swear an oath to the heavenly law and become my Zhuowen's slaves. Of course, I won't make you my slaves forever. You will be free after 100 years. Zhuowen said indifferently. He knew very well that these 20 people were all heavenly Tao masters. Cultivators who could prove their Tao were all geniuses, so it was inevitable that they would be proud and arrogant. If they were to become Zhuowen's permanent slaves, they would rather die than submit. Therefore, Zhuowen gave them a time limit, which was the same method he used to subdue Bloodscale. The 20 people looked at each other in dismay and hesitated. If you don't agree, then die. Zhuowen's gaze was sharp, and his killing intent surged out as if it was material. These 20 people naturally felt this terrifying killing intent, and their hearts trembled as they all swore the heavenly Tao oath. 100 years was too short for them. After swearing the heavenly oath, these 20 people all revealed bitter smiles. They came to the 8 heavens in high spirits, but they didn't expect to become someone else's slaves, and their master was actually someone from the 8 heavens. This made them feel even more humiliated, but between humiliation and life, they decisively chose the latter. Fortunately, they wouldn't be permanent servants. They would only be servants for 100 years, which made them feel relieved. After these 20 people swore the heavenly Tao oath, they all stood respectfully behind Zhuowen. Zhuowen didn't care about these 20 people anymore. The reason why he only made them slaves for 100 years was mainly to let these 20 people protect the Wen Snow Palace for 100 years. He could feel that there would be more and more cultivators coming from the Xian Mi heavenly domain. He always felt that the purpose of these cultivators was not only the seal of the eldritch heavenly domain, but also other purposes. In addition, Zhuowen still had to go to the space-time temple and Earth to find the origin of the mythological era. Mu Qinxue was in seclusion, so Zhuowen naturally couldn't leave the Wen Snow Palace without worry. These 20 people together were a considerable force. It should be more than enough to protect the Wen Snow Palace. You guys continue to use the stone tablet to test the Tao roots. If you find another Tao root and they are willing to follow you, you can take them away after 100 years. Zhuowen said to the 20 people behind him. When the 20 people heard this, they were all pleasantly surprised. Previously, with Shihui and Gua Yi around, even if the Tao root was chosen, it would probably be taken away by the 2 of them first. As for the 20 people, they probably could only drink the leftovers, or maybe not even the leftovers. But now that Shihui and Gua Yi were no longer around, the selection of the Tao root would naturally be a fair competition. This was a blessing in disguise for them. Hello, I'm Fire Plume from the Purple Red House. I'm also from the Xian Mi heavenly domain. The woman in the Chong Sam, who was originally standing not far away and watching coldly, brought the steel giant to Zhuowen's side and spoke in a rather polite manner. Zhuowen glanced at the woman in the Chong Sam, and then his gaze fell on the steel giant behind her. The woman in the Chong Sam, Fire Plume, didn't have a strong aura. She was probably at the peak of the heavenly Tao Master, the same level as Shihui and Gua Yi. But the steel giant behind the woman in the Chong Sam was very different. Its aura was as vast and boundless as the ocean. Zhuowen knew that it was at least a Daoyuan master, or even a Hunyuan master. Of course, Zhuowen wasn't necessarily afraid of the steel giant. After all, his Pangus sacred body had advanced to the 2 stars realm. Ordinary Daoyuan masters were no match for the Pangus sacred body, and Hunyuan master might not be able to kill him. Zhuowen, the domain lord of the great Brahma domain. Zhuowen nodded slightly and said. Fire Plume smiled and didn't mind Zhuowen's impolite attitude. She still smiled and said, Domain Lord Zhuo, you have extraordinary talent and monstrous strength. Your future is limitless. If you can go to the Xian Mi heavenly domain, you will definitely soar. Zhuowen nodded and said indifferently, What do you 2 want? If there is nothing else, I have other things to do. With what Shihui and Gua Yi had done before, Zhuowen didn't have a good impression of these people from the Xian Mi heavenly domain. The steel giant beside the woman in the Cheongsam did give him a sense of crisis, but Zhuowen wasn't afraid. If the steel giant attacked, it might not be able to stop Zhuowen. Moreover, Zhuowen also believed that the strength he had shown just now was enough to make the steel giant wary. It would certainly not attack rashly. Huiyu's brow furrowed slightly. She wasn't happy with Zhuowen's attitude, but it was clear that she was a shrewd person. It's like this, Domain Lord Zhuo. If you bring your junior sister with you to Xianmi Heavenly Domain, our Purple Red House will welcome you with open arms. Chapter 2649. Zhuowen only nodded. He didn't really care about Fire Plume's words. No matter how good Fire Plume's self-restraint was, she was still a bit angry at Zhuowen's indifferent attitude. She said coldly, Domain Lord Zhuo, if I'm not here, you will most likely die in the Heavenly Moat. I think that if you really want to go to the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, you should reconsider. Zhuowen looked coldly at Fire Plume and asked, I know that the Heavenly Moat is very dangerous. Since you can cross it to the 8 heavenly domains, I can naturally cross it to enter the Xianmi Heavenly Domain. Do I have to rely on you to enter the Xianmi Heavenly Domain? Fire Plume sneered. The Heavenly Moat is a true land of despair. If you don't have a flying ship specially designed for the Heavenly Moat, you are simply courting death. Someone like you doesn't know anything about the Heavenly Moat. I can guarantee that you will definitely die in the Heavenly Moat. Zhuowen frowned. He could tell from Fire Plume's words that there were certain conditions to cross the Heavenly Moat. Zhuowen turned his head and asked seriously, can't ordinary flying divine tools do the trick? Just as Fire Plume said, he really didn't know anything about the Heavenly Moat. He saw that there were so many people in the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, and most of them were Heavenly Tao Lords. He thought that the Heavenly Moat wouldn't be too dangerous for him, but now it seemed that he had underestimated the Heavenly Moat. Ha! If you really choose an ordinary flying divine tool, then you are dead. Not long after entering the Heavenly Moat, the flying divine tool will completely collapse. Without it, there is a chance that second step Tao confirming experts will die in the Heavenly Moat. Fire Plume sneered. Zhuowen frowned and said, Please enlighten me, Miss Fire Plume. Fire Plume shook his head and said, You and I are not related. I have no obligation to tell you these things unless you and the girl beside you join Purple Red House. Then I will take you to Xianmi Heavenly Region. Zhuowen shook his head. I won't join your Purple Red House. If you don't say it, I'm sure they already know. As he said that, Zhuowen pointed to the 20 cultivators behind him. These 20 people were also from the Xianmi Heavenly Domain, so they definitely knew the method to enter and exit the Heavenly Chasm. Fire Plume's lips curled into a sly smile as he said, They're just from a small force. They came here with the help of Shi Huai and Guo Yi's spaceships. Don't think that you can use their spaceships just because you've obtained their spirit rings, because the control of the spaceships is controlled by the forces behind them. Once they discover that the representatives they sent have died, the corresponding spaceships will automatically be scrapped. If you don't believe me, you can try the spaceships in Shi Huai and Guo Yi's spirit rings. Zhuowen was stunned. Seeing that Fire Plume didn't seem to be lying to him, he took out Shi Huai and Guo Yi's spirit rings and scanned them with his divine sense. He found a lot of Heavenly Tao origin crystals inside. Unfortunately, they were all low-grade Heavenly Tao origin crystals. In addition, there were some divine herbs, but these divine herbs all contained Tao rhymes. Zhuowen suspected that these divine herbs were Heavenly Tao origin divine herbs, materials used to refine Heavenly Tao origin divine pills. Because Zhuowen had inherited the alchemy Tao insights of the Emperor Pill Fire, he was no stranger to many Tao origin divine herbs. He was familiar with the heavenly Tao origin divine herbs in Shi and Guayi's spirit rings. Zhuowen knew that with these heavenly Tao origin divine herbs, he could use them to practice and raise his alchemy level to heavenly Tao origin divine pills. In addition, he did find 2 spaceships in Shi and Guayi's spirit rings. These 2 spaceships were different from ordinary flight divine artifacts. He could feel a powerful thrust from these spaceships, especially when he got closer to the spaceships. This thrust became more and more obvious, as if it was trying to push him out, taking out the 2 spaceships. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with surprise and doubt. That's an anti-gravity seal. Let me tell you, the biggest threat to nature's moat is the terrifying gravity that comes from its depths. The gravity is so strong that it's unimaginable. Any light that shines into nature's moat will be involuntarily sucked in by this gravity. This is also the main reason why nature's moat always looks so dark. Ordinary spaceships don't have anti-gravity seals. This means that after entering the natural chasm, it's very easy to be attracted by the terrifying gravity and fall into the endless depths of the natural chasm. You should understand now, right? Fire Plume pointed at the 2 spaceships that Zhuowen took out and said faintly. Zhuowen's eyes were solemn. If the natural chasm was really as terrifying as Fire Plume said, then wouldn't Crepe Myrtle Star be in trouble? Like him, Crepe Myrtle Star didn't know much about the natural chasm. If he used an ordinary spaceship to enter the natural chasm, he would be courting death. Thinking of this, Zhuowen sighed in his heart. He could only pray that Crepe Myrtle Star would be lucky. Moreover, he had also tested the 2 airships just now. It was just as you had said. No matter how he tried to stimulate the 2 airships with his spiritual sense, the 2 airships didn't react at all. There wasn't even a trace of Tao charm on the surface. However, the anti-gravity seal on the surface of the 2 spaceships was still there. What a complicated pattern. Zhuowen looked at the anti-gravity seal pattern on the surface of the spaceships and couldn't help but sigh. The anti-gravity seal is extremely complicated. It requires at least a heavenly fate realm formation Tao master to be able to set it up. Fire Plume said faintly. Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he calmly put the 2 spaceships into his spirit ring. Although the 2 spaceships were scrapped, the anti-gravity seal on them was very valuable for research. If he was asked to set up the anti-gravity seal out of thin air, it would be impossible for him to do it. However, Zhuowen felt that he might be able to do it if he followed the pattern of the anti-gravity restriction and copied it. Although he was only a level 9 formation Tao master, his divine sense was getting stronger with the help of the Panga banner. Even a heavenly fate realm formation, Tao master didn't have a divine sense as strong as Zhuowen's. If he used his divine sense to forcibly restore the anti-gravity seal, Zhuowen believed that he could do it. However, he might suffer a lot of backlash. After all, if a formation Tao master forcibly set up a formation Tao master that was beyond their level, it would cause a lot of damage to their divine sense. However, Zhuowen's divine sense was extremely strong, so he didn't have to worry about this. Therefore, if you want to go to the Xianmi heavenly domain, it's best for you to choose us. Otherwise, the chances of you dying in the heavenly moat are too high. I think you are a smart person. Fire Plume was still talking, but unfortunately, she was interrupted by Zhuowen. Are you done? If there's nothing else, please leave. Fire Plume was stunned. Looking at the calm, white-clothed youth in front of her, she couldn't help but get angry. What did this guy take her kindness for? He was too hateful. However, before Fire Plume could do anything, she was suppressed by the steel giant. We're fine. We'll take our leave first. The steel giant looked at Zhuowen indifferently and left the Wind Snow Palace with Fire Plume. Steel Plume, what are you doing? Are you afraid of that kid? After leaving the Wind Snow Palace, Fire Plume broke free from the steel giant and said angrily, "We don't have any conflict with this person. There's no need to get into a conflict with him. Moreover, Miss, don't you find it strange? Since this person is from the 8 heavenly domains, why is he so powerful and terrifying? And why does he know about the heavenly path origin crystal?" Steel Plume said indifferently. Chapter 2650. Processing. Steel Plume, what do you mean? Fire Plume thought of something and asked, "The energy in the starry sky of the 8 heavens is so poor. It's already not easy to cultivate to the virtual sky world. I've checked this boy. His real age is definitely not more than 500 years old. He's so young, but he already has the cultivation of the 2 extremes of life and death. He also has the strength to kill the Heavenly Tao Master and 3 Heavenly Tao Divine Tools." Steel Plume paused and looked at Fire Plume. He knew that Fire Plume already knew what he meant. This boy has a big secret. Maybe he has something to do with the origin of the mythological era. Fire Plume narrowed his eyes and said with some horror, "They didn't come to the 8 heavens mainly for the gap in the primitive heavenly realm. Although the gap in the primitive heavenly realm was big, it wasn't enough for Xianmi heavenly realm to send so many strong cultivators. They were only a small part of it. In the following days, more cultivators would come from Xianmi heavenly realm. Their main purpose was to come here because of the information provided by Shui Wuhan. The origin of the mythological era was hidden in the 8 heavens. Although they didn't know what was in the origin, they were sure that the things in the origin would definitely not be bad. It was enough to make many cultivators go crazy. In the mythological era, it was a real gathering of gods and powerful cultivators. It was an era where heroes rose together and geniuses filled the sky. In the mythological era, there were countless legends of powerful cultivators. The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, Xing Tian Zhantian, Quafu chasing the sun, Ho Yi shooting the 9 suns, and so on. These powerful cultivators were real, but they were later annihilated in the long river of time. They either died, lived in seclusion, or disappeared without a trace, until the end of the mythological era, when the primitive heavenly realm and Xianmi heavenly realm entered the era of the human race and the witch race, which was the era Zhuowen lived in. In fact, there was a gap in civilization between the mythological era and the Xianmi heavenly realm. Whether it was the primitive heavenly realm or Xianmi heavenly realm, there was no record of what happened after the mythological era ended. It could be said that the end of the mythological era came suddenly. Many powerful beings seemed to have disappeared at that moment, no longer appearing in front of everyone's eyes. Although the end of the mythological era was inexplicable, many cultivators knew that the things left behind from the mythological era were absolutely priceless treasures. They were treasures that made many cultivators go crazy. Since the origin of the mythological era was in one of the 8 heavens, and the 8 heavens had produced such an abnormal Zhuowen, Fire Plume and Steel Plume could not help but suspect that this person had something to do with the origin of Lusterless. There's a high chance that this person is related to the land of origin, but he's very strong. If we fight him head on, we won't be able to get away with it. Fire Plume said worriedly. After witnessing Zhuowen not only survive the joint attacks of over 40 heavenly Tao masters, but he'd even turned the tables and killed 20 of them. Moreover, he'd even killed Shi Huai and Guo Yi, who'd led the attack. The Fire Plume was extremely fearful of Zhuowen and didn't want to enter into conflict with him. We don't have to enter into a conflict with this person. We just have to follow him. Didn't the sect master give you a concealment talisman? That's a heavenly fate talisman. As long as we use that talisman, even the heavenly fate master might not be able to detect us, let alone this person. Steel Plume said. Fire Plume took out 2 talismans from his spirit ring and gave one to Steel Plume. Strangely, when the 2 of them put the talismans on their bodies, they actually merged with the surrounding starry sky. Even their auras were exactly the same as the starry sky. If a cultivator used his divine sense to scan the starry sky where the 2 of them were, he wouldn't think that the 2 of them were actually there. Instead, he'd think that it was just a starry sky. The 2 of them, who used the talismans, silently hid on an uninhabited meteorite tens of thousands of miles away from the One Snow Palace. Within the One Snow Palace, after Zhuowen instructed those 20 people to continue testing the stone steels, he instructed them to protect the One Snow Palace while he was away. The 20 of them naturally didn't dare to refuse. After all, they were now Zhuowen's servants. Although it was only for 100 years if Zhuowen wanted them dead, he could do so with a single thought. They would definitely not dare disobey Zhuowen's orders. After he finished instructing them, Zhuowen gazed seriously at Tong Chimei, who stood by his side, and said, "Chimei, since you possess an earth-rank ancestral Dao root, then going to the Xianmi heavenly region is actually the best choice. Why didn't you agree just now?" Tong Chimei said seriously as well, "I don't know anything about the Xianmi heavenly region. No matter if it was Shi Huai, Gua Yi, or Fire Plume, they didn't respect my choice when they recruited me. So I didn't make a choice at that time." Zhuowen nodded. In terms of choice, he agreed with Tong Chimei. With Tong Chimei's natural talent, it would be extremely easy for her to join a Dao Palace-level power in the Xianmi heavenly region. No matter if it was Shi Huai or Gua Yi, the powers standing behind them were only Dao sects, so they naturally had to respect a genius like Tong Chimei. Unfortunately, Shi Huai and Gua Yi were both cultivators of the Xianmi heavenly domain and did not have much respect for Tong Chimei. This also caused Tong Chimei to have a bad impression of Shi Huai and Gua Yi's invitation. After all, Tong Chimei was practically an amateur when it came to the matters of the Xianmi heavenly region, and all the cultivators from the Xianmi heavenly region were definitely lofty experts in her heart. So long as Shi Huai and Gua Yi were sufficiently respectful to Tong Chimei and didn't fight over her and treat her like an item, then perhaps Tong Chimei would really be tempted. "I'm going out for a period of time. These 20 people will stay in the One Snow Palace to protect all of you. The next period of time won't be too peaceful, so all of you should pay attention. If Chen Shui comes out of her closed-door cultivation, then all of you should tell her about it." After Zhuowen instructed Magatama and Yuezu, he went to inform Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse. These 2 fellows relied on his identity as Zhuowen to occupy the best place in the One Snow Palace, even showing off their strength. When Zhuowen found the 2 of them, he found that the 2 of them were acting like masters, ordering the servants of the One Snow Palace around, completely ignoring the fact that they were living under someone else's roof. "Yo, little brat, you've finally come out of your closed-door cultivation." The green-haired mummy was sitting cross-legged, enjoying the service of a frightened servant. When he saw Zhuowen come in, he said slowly. Bloodscale quickly stood up and respectfully smiled at Zhuowen. Just now, Zhuowen had caused such a large commotion in the quest hall, so Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse had naturally seen it. Chapter 2651. Huaxia Continent. After all, Shui Lin had used the high-grade Heaven's Path origin crystal that Zhuowen had given him, although he had recovered to the Heaven's Path Master realm and was much stronger than ordinary Heaven's Path Masters. Shui Lin was still a Heaven's Path Master. However, Bloodscale was besieged by more than 40 Heavenly Path Masters, 2 of whom were peak Heavenly Path Masters. Bloodscale naturally could not defeat them. At most, he would not be defeated. However, Zhuowen easily defeated the besiegement of more than 40 Heavenly Path Masters. This made Bloodscale realize that Zhuowen's strength had increased greatly after coming out of seclusion. Zhuowen also felt that Bloodscale's attitude towards him had changed significantly. However, he did not care. Instead, he looked at the green-haired mummy and said, "Since I've come out of seclusion, shouldn't we go?" The green-haired mummy nodded and said, "Since you know the planet of origin, that's great. You lead the way." Zhuowen took out the space-time roulette and left the One Snow Palace with the green-haired mummy and Bloodscale. Not long after Zhuowen left the One Snow Palace, Fire Plume and Steel Plume also took out their flying divine artifacts and followed quietly behind him on a remote meteorite not far from the One Snow Palace. The two of them used concealment talismans, and their auras were completely integrated with the starry sky. Even though Zhuowen's divine sense was very powerful, he did not notice that the two of them were secretly following him. However, the green-haired mummy, who was sitting cross-legged on the deck, glanced behind him and sneered. However, the green-haired mummy did not say anything. Instead, it sat cross-legged and closed its eyes, silently absorbing the starry sky energy around it. This time, Zhuowen was controlling it himself. Its speed was much faster than usual, almost as fast as lightning. However, Zhuowen was still somewhat dissatisfied with the space-time roulette's fastest speed. "If only I could get the complete space-time roulette," Zhuowen muttered to himself. The space-time roulette that he had obtained was not complete. Instead, it had been refined using the core components of the space-time roulette. There was a huge difference between it and the real space-time roulette. If it was a complete space-time roulette, Zhuowen believed that the speed would definitely be much faster than it was now. The space-time law inside would also be more complete. Speaking of which, the space-time roulette belonged to the space-time master. Zhuowen wondered if the space-time temple had any other flying artifacts similar to the space-time roulette. If there was, it would definitely be good news for Zhuowen. Zhuowen planned to use the space-time key to enter the space-time temple after dealing with the origin lands on Earth. A month later, Zhuowen looked at the blue planet in the distance and said, "I think the origin of the mythological era is this planet. It's called Earth, and it's also my hometown." The green-haired mummy narrowed its eyes and looked at Earth in the distance. Its gaze became cautious as it said, "You're right. I do feel an ancient aura on this planet. The age of this aura is definitely far beyond what you and I can imagine. Maybe this planet really is hiding the origin of the mythological era." With that, the green-haired mummy looked at Zhuowen seriously and said, "Is this planet really your hometown? And why are you so sure that this planet is the origin of the mythological era?" "Because on this planet, there are also myths about Pangu opening the sky, Huafu chasing the sun, Hou-Yi shooting the sun, and so on. Although these myths are different from the legends of the mythological era in this starry sky, the difference is not big. That's why I have such a guess," Zhuowen said. "No wonder. So that's how it is. No wonder the Pangu flag chose you. Maybe it has something to do with this planet." The green-haired mummy whispered as it looked at Zhuowen from head to toe, as if it was trying to get to know Zhuowen all over again. "This planet is still managed by the cultivators." As they approached Earth, the green-haired mummy looked indifferently at an invisible continent hidden around Earth and said casually, "Yes, that's the Huaxia continent, a companion of Earth. Everyone in the Huaxia continent is a cultivator, while Earth is inhabited by mortals. How do you plan to find the land of origin?" Zhuowen looked at the green-haired mummy and asked, "This jade pillar is the key to opening the land of origin. This planet may look ordinary on the surface, but I can see that there's some kind of formation hidden within this planet. This formation is naturally formed, and its level is very high. Even if it's me, I might die if I casually touch this formation. However, with this key, I think we should be able to unlock the formation, said the green-haired corpse. What's your purpose in entering the land of origin? Zhuowen's eyes flickered as he suddenly asked. The green-haired mummy said indifferently, My purpose is to recover my strength. There are many things I need in the land of origin, and there are also many good things. Don't worry, you have the panga flag, so I won't attack you. We're just going to take what we need in the land of origin. Zhuowen nodded and said nothing. Ever since he obtained the Pangu flag, the green-haired mummy had no hostility toward him. Instead, it was full of fear. He knew that the Pangu flag must be very restrained against the green-haired mummy and would not attack him easily. Whoosh, whoosh. Zhuowen looked at the streaks of sword light and realized that they were all cultivators flying on their swords. He did not feel surprised. When he first came to Earth with Tai Ching, he was also blocked by these cultivators flying on swords. He remembered that these sword cultivators were from Mount Buzhou, which should be the largest force in the Huaxia continent. Zhuowen also had some recollection of the sect master of Mount Buzhou. His name should be Yuzhe. A bunch of trash. Master, do you want me to help you destroy them? Bloodscale looked at the group of sword cultivators blocking their way with disdain. These sword cultivators were all only in the celestial realm. Even the white-haired old man at the front of the group was only in the true immortal realm. Such a cultivation was indeed no different from an ant in the eyes of Zhuowen and the others. The white-haired old man at the front of the group was Yuzhe, the sect master of Mount Buzhou. He sensed an unfamiliar force approaching Earth and immediately gathered the elites of Mount Buzhou to rush out of the continent to check it out. However, Yuzhe's heart sank when he found that he could not see through the aura of the three people on the space-time roulette in front of him, and that they gave him an extremely strong sense of oppression. Yuzhe also found that the young man in white standing at the front of the space-time roulette gave him a sense of déjà vu, as if he had seen him somewhere before. Zhuowen glanced at Bloodscale indifferently. The latter smiled awkwardly and did not dare to interrupt any more. Zhuowen walked out of the space-time roulette and cupped his hands at Yuzhe. Sect Master Yu, long time no see. How have you been? Chapter 2652. Returning to Earth. Your little brother Zhuowen? Yuzhe asked tentatively. Zhuowen smiled and said, Sect Master Yu has good eyesight. Back then, Tai Ching brought me here to settle some of the grudges from my previous life. I still have to thank Sect Master Yu. Little brother Zhuo's talent is indeed outstanding. It's only been a few hundred years, but I can't even compare to you anymore. Domain Lord Tai Ching really has good eyes. Yuzhe's face was full of emotion. He remembered that a few hundred years ago, Zhuowen was only in the heaven god realm. Now, he actually couldn't see through this child's cultivation. He knew that Zhuowen had probably advanced to the virtual sky world. Of course, if Yuzhe knew that Zhuowen was now in the life and death realm and had even killed the heavenly Tao Master, he would probably be so shocked that his teeth would fall out. Zhuowen smiled and didn't explain that he had nothing to do with Tai Ching now. Logically speaking, Zhuowen's story should have spread far and wide in the Huaxia Heaven region. Yuzhe probably didn't know about it because Earth was too remote, and Yuzhe was too weak, so he didn't know about it. May I know why little brother Zhuo came here this time? Yuzhe asked politely. Zhuowen said, Sect Master Yu, we might have to borrow Earth this time. We have some things to do. Yuzhe frowned and hesitated for a moment. Little brother Zhuo, you know that there's a difference between mortals and immortals. If you enter Earth, you might be devoured by Earth's laws of heaven and earth. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. As soon as Yuzhe finished speaking, Shuelin coldly harumphed, and an invisible sound wave spread out. Yuzhe's expression changed slightly, and he grunted as he retreated. The row of sword cultivators behind Yuze was even worse off. They staggered from side to side, their eyes filled with fear as they looked at Xuelin in disbelief. It was just a cold snort, yet it was already so powerful. Just how powerful was this person? Moreover, the blood-red clothed man was standing behind Zhuo and seemed to be following Zhuo Wen's lead. Didn't that mean that Zhuo Wen was even more terrifying than the blood-red clothed man? What can the laws of heaven and earth of a mere planet do to us? I say, you'd better keep your mouth shut. Letting us in is the best choice. Otherwise, before Bloodscale could finish speaking, he saw Zhuo turn around and look at him coldly. Bloodscale couldn't say anything else. He hurriedly said, "Master, I'm just anxious." "Don't do it again," Zhuo said calmly. Bloodscale nodded submissively. His imposing manner disappeared without a trace, and he followed behind Zhuo like an obedient little lamb. The more Bloodscale behaved like this, the more Yuze feared and feared Zhuo. The imposing manner released by Bloodscale just now was definitely not an ordinary virtual sky world. Even in the virtual sky world, he was still an expert among experts. However, such a powerful existence was actually so tame in front of Zhuo. Yuze really didn't know how strong Zhuo was. Little brother Zhuo, to be honest, the laws of heaven and earth of our earth are very strange. Generally speaking, after a cultivator enters the true immortal realm, the backlash and suppression from an ordinary planet can be completely offset by the cultivator's cultivation level. However, the laws of heaven and earth of earth are very different. The stronger the cultivator, the stronger the suppression. Even virtual sky world cultivators would be seriously injured by the terrifying backlash after entering Earth. In the end, they wouldn't dare to stay on Earth for long. "This old man isn't lying to you at all," Yuze hurriedly explained. Zhuowen's gaze sharpened. If what Yuze said was true, then Earth was indeed different from ordinary planets. At that time, he only sent a clone to Earth, so he didn't feel the backlash from the powerful laws of heaven and earth. At that time, he also didn't care too much about it. Now that he knew Earth was not ordinary, he naturally thought a lot more than before. "Sect Master Yu, we didn't come here to cause trouble. We really have important things to deal with. Even if you say so, we still plan to enter Earth and give it a try. But rest assured, Sect Master Yu, we won't take the initiative to cause trouble." Zhuo cupped his fists and said sincerely to Yuze. Yuze glanced at Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse behind Zhuo and felt bitter in his heart. He knew that even if he refused, he probably wouldn't be able to stop them. After all, Zhuo and the other two were too strong. If he refused, he would definitely offend Zhuo. If he agreed, he would instead buy a favor from them. "Sect Master Yu, this is a small token of appreciation. Please don't refuse." Seeing Yuze hesitate, Zhuo took out a jade bottle and handed it to Yuze. Yuze frowned and opened the bottle. His pupils suddenly shrank because he found that the jade bottle was actually filled with void sky pills. Moreover, there were 10 of them. Void sky pills were high-grade medicinal pills that could help peak-stage true god cultivators form their void sky bridge and advance to the virtual sky world. Yuze had been stuck at peak-stage true god for a long time. As long as he had these void sky pills, he would definitely advance to the virtual sky world. It could be said that Zhuowen's void sky pills were a temptation he couldn't refuse. Putting away the jade bottle, Yuze nodded and said, "Little brother Zhuo, as long as you don't cause trouble on Earth, you can enter." "Thank you, Sect Master Yu." Zhuo cupped his fists with a smile and immediately put away the space-time roulette. He took Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse and rushed into Earth. Watching Bloodscale and the green-haired corpse leave, Yuze sighed softly. At the same time, there was a hint of excitement in his eyes. After obtaining these void sky pills, he planned to go into closed-door meditation to break through to the virtual sky world after returning. Sect Master, are we just going to let them in? A middle-aged man came to Yuzei's side and asked somewhat unwillingly. Yuzei shook his head and said, even if we stop them, what's the point? With their strength, killing us would be as easy as squashing ants. What's the point of us stopping them? When the time comes, we'll only sacrifice ourselves for nothing. It's better to buy a favor from them. The middle-aged man fell silent. Yuzei was right. Zhuo and the others were too powerful. Shui Lin had only snorted coldly, and they had already lost their footing. If they were to fight, they wouldn't even be able to touch a finger of Shui Lin. After Yuzei and the others returned to the Huaxia continent, two figures slowly approached tens of thousands of miles away from Earth. These two figures almost merged with the starry sky. It was impossible to tell which was the figure and which was the starry sky. Miss, they've entered that planet. Could it be that it's not an ordinary planet? Steel Plume secretly said. Fire Plume, who was wearing a Chong Sam, frowned slightly as she stared at the blue planet in the distance and said, no matter how I look at it, this planet looks ordinary. Why would they enter an ordinary planet with life? Let's go in and take a look, Steel Plume said. Fire Plume pondered for a moment and nodded. The two of them quietly entered Earth. Chapter 2653. Kunlun Jade, Pillar the moment Zhuowen and the others entered Earth, their expressions changed. Zhuowen could clearly feel that there was a powerful force on the surface of Earth's atmosphere that was squeezing his body as if it was trying to push him away and prevent him from getting close. Under this pressure, Zhuowen's blood began to boil involuntarily. It was as if the blood in his body would burst out if he did not control it well. Not only Zhuowen, but Bloodscale and the green-haired mummy also sensed the abnormality. Their expressions did not look good as they tried their best to resist this terrifying pressure. Moreover, Zhuowen realized that the green-haired mummy, who was the strongest among them, was in the most difficult situation. Zhuowen guessed that this pressure would become stronger as one's strength increased. Thinking of this, Zhuowen revealed a look of understanding. He hurriedly retracted his aura and hid it within his body, suppressing his strength to below the heavenly god level. Then, Zhuowen was pleasantly surprised to find that the pressure around him had weakened a lot. My guess was right. Zhuowen muttered softly. Then he told Bloodscale and the green-haired mummy the method. The two of them followed Zhuowen's instructions and found that the pressure around them had indeed weakened a lot. Isn't this planet too strange? Why is the law of heaven and earth so powerful? After suppressing his strength, Shui Lin muttered to himself in fear. The green-haired mummy's eyes shone brightly. He knew that the more extraordinary this planet was, the more likely it was that the land of origin was hidden on this planet. Green Hat is the land of origin that you mentioned hidden on this planet. Zhuowen looked at the green-haired mummy and asked. The green-haired mummy's eyes flickered as he took out the jade pillar he had obtained from the Seuss shrine. The complicated patterns on the surface of the jade pillar were even clearer now, emitting a white light in the void. That's right. Only the land of origin can cause such a reaction from the jade pillar. It's just that after so many years of evolution, so much has changed. The green-haired mummy frowned slightly. Although they knew that the land of origin was on this planet, they didn't know the specific location. If they wanted to find the entrance to the land of origin, it would be quite troublesome. In the blink of an eye, the jade pillar in the green-haired corpse's hand trembled slightly, and the mysterious patterns on its surface fell off, connecting into a complicated pattern line that swept toward the bottom of the atmosphere. These lines were extremely fine, invisible to the naked eye of mortals. ordinary cultivators would also have a hard time detecting them. It was also because Zhuowen's divine soul was strong enough that he was able to use his divine sense to capture this line. Apparently, Bloody Scale and the green-haired mummy had noticed the pattern as well. The three of them looked at each other and tacitly followed the pattern. The pattern line passed through the atmosphere, the blue sea, and entered the continent. After passing through several large continents, it entered the easternmost part of the continent. Zhuowen looked at the place where the pattern line passed through and narrowed his eyes. Wasn't this the country where he was from in his previous life? Huaxia? Speaking of which, the legend of Pangu splitting open the sky was indeed a legend in Huaxia. In other words, the entrance to the land of origin should be within Huaxia's territory. The Dongjiang province was the most developed province in the eastern coastal area of Huaxia. It had a developed economy and a large population. Among them, Jinling City was the largest city in the Dongjiang province. It was one of the largest cities in the entire country. At this moment, many people were gathered on the top floor of a towering building in Jinling City. These men and women were dressed in gorgeous clothes and spoke elegantly. They were obviously the upper class of Jinling City. The top floor was an open-air platform with complete facilities. There was even a swimming pool on the top floor. From the swimming pool, one could overlook the entire Jinling City. However, these upper-class people were all gathered under a glass ceiling. In front of them was an old man standing straight on the stage. On the stage, there was a rod-shaped object covered by a red cloth. The attention of the men and women below was attracted by the rod-shaped object covered by the red cloth. The old man's eyes were solemn. He slowly walked to the rod-shaped object and lifted the red cloth. Immediately, a somewhat dazzling jade-colored light flickered. Immediately, it gradually disappeared, revealing a jade pillar. The surface of the jade pillar was crisscrossed with extremely complicated patterns. It also revealed an ancient and vicissitude aura. This jade pillar was obviously an extraordinary object, especially the flickering jade light just now. The moment it shone on the crowd, they only felt warm and full of energy. Is this the Kunlun jade pillar? I've heard of the legend of this Kunlun jade pillar. I thought it was just a baseless rumor, but now that I've seen it, it's actually true. This Kunlun jade pillar is too miraculous. When the jade-colored light shone on my body, I realized that my pneumonia was much better. It really has the miraculous effect of curing all kinds of diseases. The crowd below discussed animatedly and looked at the jade pillar displayed on the stage with more fervent and fanatical gazes. The old man coughed dryly and pointed to the jade pillar. Seeing this jade pillar, everyone knows that this jade pillar is the Kunlun jade pillar. A year ago, there was a sudden change in Mount Kunlun. More than 10 rays of light swept out, and according to the description of the investigators, these rays of light were the Kunlun jade pillar. The Kunlun jade pillar has been obtained by many people. Those who have obtained the Kunlun jade pillar have all recovered from all sorts of illnesses. Even old people in their 70s are full of vigor after being nourished by the Kunlun jade pillar. Everyone should know about the effects of the Kunlun jade pillar from the rumors. This is one of the Kunlun jade pillars. The old chairman of the Realm Knight group accidentally found it in an antique market. It was later confirmed to be the Kunlun jade pillar that has been rumored recently. After the old man finished speaking, his following words became much softer. They had heard of the Realm Knight group for a long time. It was the largest group in Jinling City. It was said to have a deep background and had an unusual relationship with the general secretary of the Dongjiang province. Even the mayor of Jinling City was polite to the old chairman of the Realm Knight group. It was obvious that the old chairman of the Realm Knight group was not simple. I wonder why old Chairman Chen took out the Kunlun jade pillar and summoned us, an enchanting woman below the stage asked in surprise. The old man said faintly, "Everyone here is a high-ranking person in Jinling City. Old Chen intends to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to all of you so that you can use it in turns for 3 days." As soon as he said that, an uproar broke out. Although it was only for 3 days, the Kunlun jade pillar's effects were extremely heaven-defying. Even 3 days was enough to expel all the diseases in their bodies. It could even strengthen their bodies and make them energetic. Chapter 2654. The origin of the jade pillar. As for snatching the Kunlun jade pillar, they had never thought about it. The Realm Knight Group was the largest group in Jinling City, and it controlled the underground forces of Jinling City. It was a behemoth that mingled with both the underworld and the underworld. In addition, Elder Chen had the support of the Dong Province's General Secretary. He could cover the sky with one hand in Jinling City. Who would dare to snatch the Kunlun jade pillar from such a terrifying person? If anyone dared to do such a thing, they would not live to see the next day. After all, the Realm Knight Group was too powerful, and it was almost a monopoly. Elder Chen is willing to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to us. It shouldn't be without reason, right? A man with big framed glasses asked calmly. The old man smiled and said, "Of course." In fact, the Realm Knight Group plans to take over the huge wasteland in the north of Jinling City and build a business circle that belongs to the Realm Knight Group. However, the mayor of Jinling City has been obstructing them. So Elder Chen needs your help. Everyone's expression changed slightly. They all knew about the wasteland in the north of Jinling City. It was said that it was a big project approved by the country, but it became a wasteland because of some delay. The wasteland was very large, at least hundreds of thousands of square meters. Because it was approved by the country, it was technically the country's. Without the country's permission, no one dared to touch it. The Realm Knight Group was bold enough to have ideas about the wasteland. However, many people knew the inside story. They knew that the wasteland had been abandoned by the country, but the mayor of Jinling City was more old-fashioned. Without the approval of the higher-ups, the mayor would not give the wasteland to developers. Everyone, I think it's obvious that a wasteland is better than the Kunlun jade pillar. If you don't agree, then pretend I didn't say anything, the old man said calmly. The originally quiet underground began to clamor. In the end, they all agreed to help when fighting for the wasteland. The old man revealed a satisfied expression when he saw that everyone had agreed. Soon after, just as he was about to pick up the jade pillar, he actually grabbed empty air. The old man's pupils shrank. He quickly looked over and found that not far to his left, a young man in white had appeared without him noticing. Moreover, the young man in white was wearing an ancient white robe. He held the Kunlun jade pillar in his hand and was constantly studying it. His face was full of surprise. There are actually jade pillars on Earth? But why is this jade pillar so much thinner than the one in Green Hat's hand? It seems to be only a tenth of the size of that jade pillar. The white-clothed young man muttered to himself as he casually threw the jade pillar into his spirit ring. Seeing the Kunlun jade pillar disappear before their eyes, the old man and everyone below were shocked. "Who are you? Where's the Kunlun jade pillar?" The old man was the first to react. He secretly pressed a button hidden in his pocket. Then, from the secret door behind him, more than 10 burly men in black suits rushed out. The bodyguards took out their pistols one after another and pointed their pitch-black muzzles at the young man in white. The white-clothed youth was none other than Zhuowen. He had arrived here by following the lines. The green-furred mummy and Bloodscale were standing behind Zhuowen. However, the two of them had already used a concealment technique to conceal themselves. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to see them. Kunlun Jade Pillar? You named this thing the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Could it be that this thing has something to do with Kunlun Mountain? Zhuowen's expression was calm. He turned a blind eye to the pistols in the hands of the bodyguards. Fire! The old man regained his composure. He didn't want to talk nonsense with Zhuowen and immediately gave the order. Rather dense gunshots rang out. The people below had already retreated far away. They looked over in horror. They didn't expect the old man to be so decisive and shoot immediately. This was going to kill someone. But then an incredible scene appeared before their eyes. They saw the white-clothed young man standing in the same place, letting the bullets hit his body. His expression didn't change at all. What shocked them even more was that these bullets were blocked when they fell within a foot of the white-clothed young man. They saw that there seemed to be an invisible barrier around the white-clothed young man. When the bullets fell on the invisible barrier, dense ripples and fluctuations splashed out under the white-clothed young man's feet. Many bullets were scattered on the ground. These were all bullets that were blocked by the invisible barrier. How is this possible? Is he still human? He can't be killed by the pistols. Everyone was trembling in fear. Compared to the old man's order to shoot, they were now even more afraid. Think about it. A person who couldn't even be killed by a pistol was simply a monster. It was something that couldn't be explained by common sense. This was what scared them the most. The old man was also shocked. The dozen or so bodyguards standing behind the old man were also dumbfounded. Only after they had emptied the bullets in their pistols did they realize that the white-clothed youth was still standing in the same place, completely unharmed. You, what are you? The old man took a few steps back. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he said in disbelief. Zhuowen impatiently waved his hand. The old man's body involuntarily flew toward Zhuowen. In the end, Zhuowen grabbed his collar with one hand and lifted him into the air. Let go of our boss. The bodyguards shouted and quickly changed the magazine, intending to shoot at Zhuowen again. Unfortunately, Zhuowen didn't intend to continue the stalemate with these bodyguards. With a flick of his finger, the bodyguards were all involuntarily sent flying. They smashed the glass door behind them and fainted on the spot. All of you stay here. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. The upper echelons who were hiding originally planned to sneak away. Unfortunately, Zhuowen's words made them all shrink back. They trembled as they looked at Zhuowen. Old man, you just said that it was the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Could it be related to the Kunlun Mountain? Zhuowen no longer paid attention to those upper echelons. Instead, he indifferently looked at the trembling old man in his hand and asked. The old man was already scared by Zhuowen's methods. He immediately confessed the origin of the Kunlun Jade Pillar. It turned out that the Kunlun Jade Pillar was shot out from the Kunlun Mountain a year ago. It was said that there were a total of 15 Kunlun Jade Pillars from the Kunlun Mountain. Each pillar was different in size. However, its heaven-defying effect slowly spread among the upper echelons of China. Many upper echelons were full of desire for the Kunlun Jade Pillar. According to the rumors, the Kunlun Jade Pillar could cure all kinds of diseases. It even had the miraculous effect of bringing the dead back to life. Kunlun Mountain. Chapter 2655. Old Zhangkunlun Mountain was known as the #1 sacred mountain in Huaxia. The mountain range started from the east of the Pamir Plateau in the west, traversed between Xinjiang and Tibet, and extended all the way to Qinghai. Zhuowen didn't expect the Kunlun Jade Pillar to appear in Kunlun Mountain. Didn't that mean that the place of origin that they had been searching for was also in Kunlun Mountain? Do you know anything about the other Kunlun Jade Pillars? Zhuowen asked the old man. He had a feeling that the Kunlun Jade Pillar was definitely a key item. He planned to collect it. The old man smiled bitterly and shook his head. I'm not too sure about the Kunlun jade pillar, but Old Chun from the Realm Knight group has been collecting them. He should know more than me. Then bring me there, Zhuan said calmly. Immortal, are you going to go there just like that? The old man looked at Zhuan's outfit and asked cautiously. In the presidential suite of a 5-star hotel in Jinling City, Zhuan stood in front of the full-length mirror and looked at the t-shirt and jeans he was wearing. His eyes were filled with nostalgia. Strictly speaking, Earth was Zhuan's true hometown. His feelings for Earth were much deeper than those for the heavenly armor planet. Now that he was wearing clothes from Earth again, Zhuan felt as if a lifetime had passed. Brat, what are you doing? There's a connection between the jade pillars. We should be able to find it by following the connection. Are you really going to ask a mortal? The green-haired mummy appeared in the room and looked at Zhuan's modern clothes in annoyance. Zhuan looked at the mummy indifferently and said, When I found the Kunlun jade pillar, I used my divine sense to scan the entire Huaxia. I only found 13 Kunlun jade pillars in Huaxia. The old man said that there are 15 Kunlun jade pillars in total. Including the one I have, there's still one missing. The clue to that pillar is broken. Perhaps I can get some information from Old Chen. At this point, Zhuan glanced at the green-haired mummy and continued, You and Bloodscale have been to Kunlun Mountain, right? Did you find anything? The green-haired mummy said with a serious look, We have found the hidden entrance of Mount Kunlun. However, we need 2 jade pillars. The jade pillars are the keys. One is useless. Your guess is correct. The 15 Kunlun jade pillars should be another jade pillar that has been split into 15 parts. If we want to open the entrance to Kunlun Mountain, we need to gather all 15 Kunlun jade pillars. But how are you so sure that Old Chen knows about the last Kunlun jade pillar? The green-haired mummy asked doubtfully. Zhuan smiled faintly and said, Since Old Chen is willing to rent the Kunlun jade pillar to others and isn't afraid of it being snatched away, he clearly has some confidence. And this confidence, in my opinion, means that this old man still has another Kunlun jade pillar. However, I didn't find a second Kunlun jade pillar in Jinling City. Clearly, this old man is very cunning. He must have hidden the last Kunlun jade pillar in a very secretive place. The green-haired mummy nodded. He felt that Zhuan's speculation was reasonable. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, followed by a respectful voice. Mr. Zhua, are you done changing? If you are, this little one will bring you to see Old Chen. Zhuan opened the door. Outside the door was the old man that Zhuan had grabbed by the collar on the balcony earlier. This old man's name is Zhang Zhen. He runs a textile business in Jinling City. His assets are over 100 million, and he can be considered as an upper-class person in Jinling City. However, this Zhang Zhen loves to hug someone's thigh. Even if he became an upper-class person, this Zhang Zhen was willing to run errands for Old Chen in order to hug his thigh. Now that Zhang Zhen had witnessed Zhuan's unfathomable strength, he treated Zhuan like he was his own father. His attitude was so good that there was nothing that could be said about it. This is your reward. Zhuan took out a pill and gave it to the old man. The latter looked at the pill in his hand suspiciously. Although he was nervous, he still swallowed it under Zhuan's watchful gaze. After swallowing the pill, the old man's complexion turned rosy. His entire body was filled with vigor, as though he was a few years younger. My lord, is this a miracle pill? Zhang Zhen asked excitedly. Lead the way. If you perform well, you will not be short of this pill. Zhuan's expression was calm. The pill that he gave Zhang Zhen was the most common body strengthening pill. It was used by cultivators who had just stepped onto the path of martial arts to strengthen their body. This pill was too common in Heavenly Armor Planet. However, on Earth, where there was no cultivation, it was an extremely precious miracle pill. Zhang Zhen agreed excitedly. In his heart, he was determined to hug Zhuo Wen's thigh tightly. After all, at his age, he already had enough wealth. What he lacked the most was health. The pill that Zhuo Wen casually gave out could actually revitalize his old body. This was much more precious than any gold or silver. After walking out of the five-star hotel, Zhang Zhen quickly walked to the door of a Mercedes-Benz S-Class sedan in front of the door and personally opened the door for Zhuo Wen. Under the envious gazes of many people at the door, Zhuo Wen calmly entered the car. Zhang Zhen walked to the other side and sat beside Zhuo Wen in the back seat, carefully serving him. Zhuo Wen sat in the car, leaned against the car pillow, and closed his eyes to rest. Seeing that Zhuo Wen was unwilling to speak, Zhang Zhen did not want to disturb Zhuo Wen. Instead, he asked the driver to hurry to the Realm Knight Group's headquarters. Half an hour later, the sedan stopped in the most prosperous area of Jinling City. It was brightly lit and bustling with people. In this area, the most dazzling building belonged to the Realm Knight Group's headquarters, the Realm Knight Building. This building was more than 600 meters tall. In this area, it stood out like a crane among chickens. It was extremely eye-catching. After getting out of the sedan, Zhang Zhen enthusiastically led Zhuo Wen into the Realm Knight Building. The elevator in the Realm Knight Building was very fast. It only took a minute to reach the top floor. Elder Chen is in this room. Sir, let's go in. Zhang Zhen pointed at the iron door at the end of the corridor and said to Zhuo Wen with a smile. However, the moment Zhang Zhen took a step forward, he was immediately pulled back by Zhuo Wen. Then, the iron door immediately opened, and more than 30 fully armed soldiers walked out. These soldiers held explosion-proof shields that were as tall as a person. They walked side by side, and their cold muzzles were pointed at Zhuo Wen and Zhang Zhen in the corridor. Behind these armed policemen stood a spirited old man. Although this old man had a head full of white hair, his eyes were sharp. It was obvious that this was a unique temperament formed by being in a high position for a long time. Next to the old man was a charming secretary in uniform. At this moment, the secretary was holding a folder in her hand and looking at the armed policeman in front of her with a pale face. She had just finished helping Elder Chen with the documents and was about to leave when she saw these armed policemen rushing out from another place. Then, the secretary saw that these 30 armed policemen were only targeting the old man and an ordinary young man in front of her. Elder Zhang. The secretary recognized the old man next to the young man. Then she looked at Elder Chen and asked, Elder Chen, what happened? Why are the armed policemen being deployed? Chapter 2656. Mariana Zhang Zhen trembled in fear. He wasn't afraid of the armed police, but he was afraid of Zhuo Wen. He clearly wanted to bring Zhuo Wen to have a good talk with Elder Chen, but he didn't expect Elder Chen to gather the armed police here to wait for him. Old Chen had a deep background, and he had connections with the Eastern Province's General Secretary. So he naturally had the ability to mobilize the armed police. Previously, Zhang Zhen spoke to Old Chen over the phone and said that Zhuo Wen wasn't an ordinary person. He was a godlike figure, and handguns were useless against such an existence. During the call, Old Chen agreed to it, but he never thought that he would play dirty. Old Chen, don't be rash. This is an existence that you can't afford to offend. You're courting death. Zhang Zhen trembled as he immediately spoke to Old Chen behind the armed police. Old Chen replied in disdain, Zhang Zhen, what era are we in now? What godlike figure are you talking about? Is there something wrong with your head? Back then, When Zhang Zhen spoke to him over the phone, Zhang Zhen described that Zhuowen could withstand bullets without any injuries. Old Chun sneered in his heart, but he wasn't bothered by it. In modern society, how could there be such a person? Furthermore, Old Chun was even more disdainful of godlike figures. It was just a superstition made up by the ancients. The secretary stood beside Old Chun with her head filled with confusion. She looked at Old Chun nervously and asked, "Old Chun, you're not intending to deal with them, right? This is the company." Old Chun coldly snorted, "If they know what's good for them, I will naturally not give the order to shoot." As he spoke, Old Chun looked at the white-clothed youth beside Zhang Zhen and asked, "You're Zhuowen, right? I don't care how you stole my Kunlun jade pillar, but I'm giving you a chance. Hand over the Kunlun jade pillar, and you can still live." On the other hand, Zhang Zhen was anxious as he immediately explained to Zhuowen that this matter had nothing to do with him. Zhuowen patted Zhang Zhen's shoulder, indicating that he didn't blame the latter before he slowly walked towards Old Chun. He could tell that Zhang Zhen wasn't lying to him. It must be Old Chun who wanted to kill him. "Are you courting death?" Old Chun's face darkened as he looked at the white-clothed young man who was walking towards him slowly. His eyes were filled with hostility. The secretary standing beside Old Chun also looked at Zhuowen in disbelief. In front of so many guns, how could this young man still dare to move forward? Could it be that there is something wrong with this person's head? Unfortunately, Elder Chen's words had no effect on Zhuowen. Zhuowen continued to walk over slowly. Seeing that Zhuowen was about to reach the armed police, Old Chen's eyes flashed with a trace of ferocity as he shouted, "Open fire!" Elder Chen, the secretary, looked at Old Chun in disbelief. This was a living person, and Old Chun actually gave the order to shoot. Bang, bang, bang. More than 30 pitch-black and ice-cold muzzles suddenly shot out dazzling sparks, and the sound of gunfire resounded in the corridor like thunder. The highest floor of the Genia building should be bulletproof and equipped with excellent soundproof materials. Therefore, some of the bullets that missed only left bullet marks on the walls. The coldness in Old Chen's eyes was immediately replaced by shock because he found that the white-clothed young man in the middle of the gunfire did not stop moving forward at all. Moreover, if one looked carefully, one could see that there was an invisible ripple defense in front of the young man, blocking the bullets that fell in front of the young man. A continuous stream of bullets fell in front of the young man, and then the bullets rustled and fell one by one, gathering into a pile of bullets at the young man's feet. The more than 30 armed police also showed a look of horror, and the same thought appeared in their minds at the same time. Is this still a human? Bang, bang, bang. When Zhuowen came in front of the armed police, he waved his hand. Instantly, these armed police officers who were holding riot shields were all sent flying. They swayed left and right, crashed into the walls on both sides, and rolled on the ground continuously. This. Old Chun looked at this scene in disbelief, and the secretary beside him was even more shocked with her beautiful eyes wide open. "Old Chun, is there anything else you need to entertain me with?" Zhuowen asked casually. Old Chun sat on the ground, pointed at Zhuowen, and said incoherently, "Who are you?" Zhuowen grabbed Old Chun with his right hand and lifted him up. A cool energy entered Old Chun's body, calming the originally panicking Old Chun down. After all, Old Chun was a person who had been in a high position for a long time. Although what happened to Zhuowen just now was beyond common sense, he also knew that he still had a bargaining chip in his hand. "Old Chun, don't think that just because you know the whereabouts of the other Kunlun jade pillar, you have a bargaining chip to negotiate with me. If you think so, I will immediately kill you and search your memory, and I will also know the whereabouts of the Kunlun jade pillar." Zhuowen's next words immediately made Old Chun disheartened. Old Chen's strategy was unparalleled, but in the face of absolute strength, a mere strategy was not worth mentioning. Moreover, after seeing Zhuowen's terrifying ability, Old Chen was not surprised that this person had the ability to search his memory. "Sir, this old man only begs you to spare my life. I will immediately tell you the whereabouts of the Kunlun Jade Pillar." Old Chen finally gave in. "Let's talk inside." Zhuowen put down Old Chen and said indifferently. Old Chen nodded repeatedly and ordered his secretary to prepare tea, while he led Zhuowen into his office. Old Chen's office was extremely large, more than 300 square meters, and the interior decoration was also extremely luxurious. Zhuowen casually sat in Old Chen's office chair and looked at Old Chen, who was standing respectfully at the side. Zhang Zhen, on the other hand, was not far away, and his eyelids were lowered. Whether it was Old Chen or Zhuowen, their positions were much higher than his, and he was completely unable to get a word in. "Speak." Zhuowen picked up the tea that his secretary had poured for him and slowly sipped it. For Zhuowen, directly searching Old Chen's memory was the best choice, but he did not intend to do so. In this mortal world, he did not intend to kill indiscriminately, as it would break the original rules of the mortal world. After all, the rules of Earth were not simple, and as long as it was not a big matter, Zhuowen would not kill indiscriminately. Old Chen wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said, "Actually, I do have another Kunlun Jade Pillar, but as a precaution, I hid it 10,000 meters under the Mariana Trench." Mariana Trench? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He was not unfamiliar with the Mariana Trench. It was said to be the deepest trench in the world, with a depth of 10,000 meters. However, the Mariana Trench was not within Huaxia, but in Southeast Asia near the Pacific Ocean. Zhuowen's divine sense was powerful enough, but after entering Earth, most of its power had been suppressed. At most, his divine sense could only scan Huaxia. Chapter 26:57. Whereabouts? Take it out immediately and hand it over to me, Zhuowen said coldly. Old Chen sighed in his heart. The Kunlun Jade Pillar had the effect of prolonging one's life and strengthening one's body. He had been keeping the Kunlun Jade Pillar by his side all this time. His spirit was much better than before, as if he was 10 years younger. Now that both of his Kunlun Jade Pillars had been taken away by this person, he knew that he would no longer be able to enjoy the benefits of the Kunlun Jade Pillar. However, he also knew that compared to the Kunlun Jade Pillar, his life was more important. "I have great use for the Kunlun Jade Pillar. I know why you mortals want the Kunlun Jade Pillar. Take this bottle of elixir. It will help you expel all kinds of diseases and prolong your life by at least 20 years. Zhuowen casually tossed a jade bottle to Old Chen. Old Chen took the jade bottle skeptically. He opened the bottle out of curiosity, and a medicinal aroma immediately filled the air. Just by smelling the medicinal fragrance, Elder Chen felt energized, and his whole body felt light. "This is..." Elder Chen's eyes were filled with excitement. He poured out a pill and couldn't wait to swallow it. Then he was surprised to find that his body was warm, and he could clearly feel that his physical fitness was constantly improving and becoming stronger. "Sir, this pill is so magical." Old Chen was excited. He wanted the Kunlun Jade Pillar because he wanted to use it to improve his body's quality. Since Zhuowen had given him this pill, the Kunlun Jade Pillar was of little value to him. Moreover, he also found that the effect of this pill on his body was much stronger than the Kunlun Jade Pillar. The Kunlun Jade Pillar was not originally used for nourishing, but this pill was a medicinal herb that was specially used for the human body. It was normal that the effect on Old Chen was better than the Kunlun Jade Pillar. "You gave me the Kunlun Jade Pillar, so what if I give you another bottle?" Zhuowen took out another jade bottle and placed it on the table. He looked at Old Chen indifferently. Inside the jade bottle was a life-continuing pill. Moreover, it was only a mortal-grade pill. It had the effect of prolonging the life of a criminal without any cultivation base, but for a cultivator of joie, one's level, it was simply trash. Zhuowen could easily refine such an elixir. The reason he gave it to Old Qin was because he wanted Old Qin to willingly hand over the Kunlun jade pillar. Sure enough, after Zhuowen took out such a pill and hinted that he had more pills in his possession, Elder Chen's thoughts about the Kunlun jade pillar lessened. Furthermore, in order to obtain the other bottle of pills in Zhuowen's hands, he couldn't wait to hand over the other Kunlun jade pillar to Zhuowen. Suddenly, Elder Chen's phone rang. Chun Lao looked at Zhuowen and didn't answer the phone. "Take it." The bell rang several times before Zhuowen finally spoke. Old Qin nodded and picked up the phone to answer the call. His face immediately changed. "What's wrong?" Zhuowen's eyes flickered. The Kunlun jade pillar was found by the Country F army in the Mariana Trench and was seized by them. My people were basically all killed. Old Chun said angrily. "Country F?" Zhuowen asked. In his previous life, Zhuowen was a university student in Huaxia, so he was naturally familiar with the countries in the world. Country F was located in the Western Pacific Ocean and was a multi-ethnic archipelago country in Southeast Asia. The Mariana Trench wasn't far from Country F. Although the Mariana Trench isn't far from Country F, you placed the Kunlun jade pillar 10,000 meters under the sea. Generally speaking, it shouldn't have been discovered by Country F. Zhuowen said lightly. Old Chen sighed. It should be a spy who leaked the news. It's hard to guard against a thief in the family. Now that the Kunlun jade pillar should be in the hands of Country F's president, this is troublesome. Speaking of this, Old Chen frowned. Although the Realm Knight Corporation that he controlled was huge, it was only a local tyrant in Jinling's city. Compared to a country like Country F, it paled in comparison. Although Country F was only a small country, it still had complete military resources. It wasn't something that a mere corporation could compare to. "Sir, what should we do?" Old Chen looked at Zhuowen and was quite anxious. Although Zhuowen was powerful and couldn't even deal with guns, could he fight against cannons, fighter jets, and tanks? "Follow me to Country F." Zhuowen said lightly. "Sir, what do you plan to do when you go to Country F?" Old Chen had a bad feeling. "I'm going to rob them. If Country F doesn't give it to me, then I'll just destroy them." Zhuowen's voice was cold. Although he didn't want to cause trouble on Earth, this matter involved the Kunlun jade pillar, so he naturally had to take extreme measures. "What?" "Sir, that's a country, and Country F's armed forces are made up of regular army, reserve army, and paramilitary forces. Among them, the regular army has 109,000 soldiers. The active army has 66,000 soldiers, organized into 8 infantry divisions, 23 infantry brigades, 8 artillery battalions, 1 armored brigade, 5 special forces brigades, and 1 presidential guard. The Navy has 26,000 soldiers, organized into 1 fleet headquarters, 6 Navy headquarters, and 4 Marine brigades. The Air Force has 17,000 soldiers, organized into 3 air divisions, 9 flying wings, and 7 service support wings. There's no way we can fight against such a large force. "Sir, although you're strong, that's an entire country," Old Chen quickly said. Zhuowen smiled and didn't explain. Instead, he said lightly, "Old Chen, you should have a private jet, right? Take me to Country F tomorrow. Also, inform the president of Country F to hand over the Kunlun jade pillar. Otherwise, Country F will cease to exist." Old Chen hesitated. Country F was a country, and Zhuowen dared to say such arrogant words. This was simply asking for death. Moreover, he was so brazen. Wasn't this telling Country F that not only did he dare to visit, but he also dared to destroy Country F by himself? This was definitely a slap to Country F's face. Old Chen believed that if he dared to bring Zhuo Wen's words to the president of Country F, when they entered Country F, what awaited them would be a fully armed army of 100,000, as well as terrifying tanks, cannons, and fighter jets. What? Didn't you hear what I said? Zhuo looked at Old Chen, and a sharp killing intent suddenly attacked him. Old Chen was so scared that he fell to the ground. Yes, yes, yes. This old man will immediately do as you say. Old Chen felt bitter. He wasn't an idiot. He knew that if he dared to not do as Zhuo said, he would immediately be destroyed. The next day, an earth-shattering piece of news was spreading all over the world at lightning speed. It was said that there was a person in Huaxia named Zhuo who threatened to take something from the president of Country F, and if the president didn't hand it over, he would destroy Country F himself. This news was so shocking that many people, after being shocked, subconsciously thought that there was something wrong with this person's head. All the major forces in the world, both in the open and in the dark, were closely watching Country F and the young man named Zhuo. Chapter 2658. Landing in Country F. What is the origin of this person? He dares to go against a country by himself? Oh, my God, this man may have lost his mind. God, please save this lost lamb. This person is from Huaxia. Will it affect the relationship between Huaxia and Country F? The world's leaders were also paying close attention and received news from intelligence agents from time to time. Although they all thought that the young man was crazy, what really caught their attention was Country F's actions. Because according to the information they received, Country F gathered 100,000 regular troops in the name of a drill and gathered all these regular troops in Country F's capital, Manila. The world leaders were not fools. They all knew that Country F's drill was fake and that it was probably to guard against the young man named Zhuo. Of course, what they could not understand was that Country F was too much. He was just an ordinary person. Was there a need to gather 100,000 regular troops? Inside the presidential palace in City M, President Duterte frowned. He held a slender jade pillar in his hand, as if he was thinking about something. Mr. President, the Realm Knight Corporation's private jet has left Huaxia and will arrive in Country F in about an hour. A general in military uniform stood straight and stared at Duterte, who was sitting in a chair in front of him and thinking hard. Launch a long-range missile and shoot down that private jet. Duterte tapped the table with his right hand and said lightly. The general nodded. Although he felt that Duterte's decision was making a mountain out of a molehill, he did not refute his president. After the general left, a charming woman slowly walked in from the back door. The woman had a perfect body and delicate face. She was a peerless beauty. Mr. President, why did you mobilize so many people? You're only dealing with one person, not an entire country. The charming woman leaned on Duterte's body and said softly, "From the captives we captured, it is said that the Realm Knight Corporation sent a godlike person who is not afraid of bullets. Although I know that I mobilized so many people, it's never wrong to be careful. Anyway, this is just a drill. I don't think Huaxia will have any excuse to make trouble for us if we accidentally hit a private jet with a long-range missile. After all, this can only be considered an accident." Duterte hugged the woman and said with a smirk, "Mr. President, you're still so wise." The woman whispered into Duterte's ear. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps came from outside. Then, the general who had just left hurriedly walked in. "What's wrong?" Duterte asked coldly. The general bent down and said in a trembling voice, "General, the long-range missile failed." Duterte said nonchalantly, "Since the launch failed, then launch another one. How do you usually train your subordinates to make such mistakes?" The general quickly shook his head and said, "Mr. President, The long-range missile was successfully launched, but the long-range missile hit the plane and exploded. However, the plane is safe and sound and continues to fly towards us. Nothing happened even after a long-range missile hit the plane? Are you trying to make fun of me? Duterte thought that the general was joking and said with an unfriendly expression, "No, Mr. President, look at this video. This is the surveillance video from the missile department." The general quickly took out a tablet and turned it on. The video showed a small private plane. When the rainbow-like missile appeared in the video, it directly exploded on the plane. Then, a miraculous scene appeared. In the terrifying explosion, the plane slowly flew out without any damage. How is this possible? The president and the woman were stunned. Continue to launch the missiles. I don't believe that we can't destroy this plane, Duterte said while panting. The general left the presidential palace uneasily. He didn't know why, but when he found that the plane was ineffective against the long-range missile, he felt uneasy. We're not dead. Inside the plane, Old Chen, the secretary, Zhang Zhen, and the pilot looked around in fear. When they found that they were still in the plane and that the plane was intact, they all showed expressions of relief. The moment the long-range missile landed on the plane, they thought that they were finished. They didn't expect that they were fine. Then their eyes all fell on the young man sitting on the left, leisurely leaning against the wall. They knew that the reason why the plane was fine was most likely related to this young man. Not good. A few more long-range missiles are coming. The pilot's panicked voice came. Old Chun and the others' hearts were in their throats, but they soon found that the long-range missiles still landed on the plane, but they were still fine. But the more it was like this, the more they respected the young man sitting leisurely on the side. Even long-range missiles couldn't do anything to this person. How terrifying was this person? When the plane finally landed in Country F under the bombardment of countless long-range missiles, the leaders of Country F and even the whole world were shocked. Everyone realized that something was wrong. Country F's president, Duterte, even walked out of his palace and stared at the small plane in the sky. "Fighter team, get ready. Destroy this plane." Duterte reacted quickly and immediately gave the order. Soon, in Country F, more than 10 fighter jets flew out. These fighter jets spewed out terrifying jets and then flew high into the sky at an extremely fast speed. More than a dozen fighter jets surrounded the small plane and released their missiles. More than 10 missiles bombarded the small plane. In the sky, a dazzling explosion of energy dust attracted the attention of everyone in Country F. Immediately after, the people of Country F were shocked to find that the small plane that was attacked leisurely flew out of the explosion, and then a bloody light flew out of the plane. Everyone only saw the bloody light flash in the sky, and more than 10 fighter jets all exploded. Amidst the countless explosions, the small plane slowly landed in City M's harbor. At this moment, City M's harbor was surrounded by 100,000 regular soldiers, and nearly 100 tanks surrounded the harbor. The door of the small plane opened, and a young man in casual clothes was the first to walk out. The bloody light in the sky landed next to the young man. Chapter 2659. Duterte's despair. Duterte saw from the computer screen that the blood sword destroyed the few dozen fighter jets of Country F and landed beside the youth in casual clothes. His face was full of disbelief. "Mr. President, this is not a human. Do we still have to continue?" An officer beside Duterte was trembling. His voice was full of fear. He never thought that a human could have such terrifying power. In other words, was this really a human? Now, the officer was hoping that Duterte would immediately stop the war and make peace. Duterte's pupils shrank. Although he was shocked by Zhuowen's move, he was still the leader of a country. His mind was naturally more mature than the average person. Duterte held the Kunlun jade pillar in his hand. He knew that the youth came for the Kunlun jade pillar. If it was before, Duterte would definitely not care about the Kunlun jade pillar. But now that Duterte had experienced the benefits of the Kunlun jade pillar, he naturally would not let it go so easily. Moreover, this person only brought a few people and forcefully landed in Country F. He was the president of Country F. If he was trampled on like this and had to hand over the pillar in his hand with a smile, Country F's reputation in the world would really be tarnished. This person may be an ancient martial arts master in Huaxia, but he is only one person. We have more than 100,000 soldiers. Why should we be afraid of this person? Duterte sneered and continued, General Booker, pass down my order. Kill this person on the spot. Leave no one alive. General Booker was the officer next to Duterte. General Booker smiled bitterly. He did not expect the president to still want to attack after seeing this person's inhuman strength. He did not know if it was right or wrong for Country F to provoke such a strong person. However, General Booker also thought that Country F's 100,000 soldiers were enough to take down the youth. After all, he was only one person, while they had a powerful army of 100,000. Zhuowen walked down and stood in place. Elder Chen, Zhang Zhen, and the others walked down and stood behind Zhuowen. When Old Chen and the others saw the endless army surrounding them, as well as the pitch-black muzzles of nearly 100 tanks aimed at them, they were all scared witless and trembling. Their hearts were beating like drums. Facing such a powerful army, did the young man in front of them really have a chance of winning? Zhuowen stood in place, not because he was afraid of the surrounding troops, but because he was waiting for Country F President Duterte's decision. If Duterte obediently handed over the Kunlun jade pillar, he would naturally not start a massacre, but leave. Unfortunately, what happened next did not go as Zhuowen had expected. The surrounding troops began to get restless. Soon after, concentrated gunshots rang out and countless sparks burst forth, shooting toward Zhuowen. At the same time, the cannons on the tanks fired at the same time. Terrifying shells exploded on the spot like fireworks. Suddenly, the place where Zhuowen and the others were was turned into ruins. Only the embryonic form of a large crater could be vaguely seen in the smoke. Duterte saw this scene on the computer screen and revealed a smug smile. In his view, no matter how powerful the youth was, he would definitely die in such a hail of bullets. But soon, he was shocked to find that in the smoke, a blood-red light soared into the sky. Then, a ring-shaped blood-red light swept in all directions. Wherever the blood-red light passed, whether it was the army, the fortifications, or the tanks, everything was annihilated into nothingness. In just an instant, the surrounding 100,000 soldiers were all annihilated by the blood-red light and turned into nothingness as if they were vaporized. Duterte watched the army. He relied on being annihilated just like that. He stood in place as if he was petrified. General Booker also came in at this moment, but he looked like he had lost his soul, like a walking corpse. Mr. President, our Country F's regular army was annihilated. General Booker's mouth was full of bitterness. He half knelt on the ground, his voice trembling. Duterte suddenly smashed the computer like a violent lion and said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It's just one person. How could he have such powerful strength? This person must have used some kind of camouflage, or my computer must have been hacked. That must be it." General Booker just silently knelt in front of him and did not say anything. He knew that he could not speak at will now. "Your Country F's President Duterte?" Suddenly, a calm voice was heard. But strangely, the voice did not appear in the room, but in the minds of General Booker and Duterte. Duterte subconsciously took a few steps back, looking at the youth in casual clothes slowly walking in from the front door of the presidential palace. The fear in his eyes became more intense. It should be noted that the presidential palace was at least 200 kilometers away from the port. Even with the fastest sports car, it would take more than an hour. However, it had only been a few minutes since this person destroyed the regular army, and he had already arrived at the presidential palace. What kind of speed was this? Old Chen, Zhang Zhen, and the others followed behind Zhuowen. They looked at Zhuowen with eyes full of fanaticism and awe. The move that Zhuowen showed just now was really shocking. They really could not imagine how a human could have such power. Only an immortal could have such means. This was the consensus in the hearts of Old Chen, Zhang Zhen, and the others. General Booker, who was kneeling on the ground, was so frightened that he quickly got up and wanted to escape. Unfortunately, Zhuowen only looked at General Booker indifferently, and the latter fell to the ground as if he was electrocuted. He died just like that. Zhuowen was no stranger to General Booker. This guy was the one who ordered the regular army to attack him. Of course, he also knew that it was under Duterte's instructions. However, there was no doubt that General Booker was an accomplice. Duterte was completely shocked. Only then did he realize that his presidential palace had become much quieter than usual. It should be known that the presidential palace's security was the strictest in the entire country of Country F. Now that someone had forced their way in, logically speaking, the garrison should have already been alerted. However, there was no movement at all. Obviously, Duterte also knew that the garrison stationed in the presidential palace had already been attacked. Duterte, I have already asked Old Chen to speak to you. Hand over the Kunlun jade pillar, and I, Zhuowen, will not blame Country F. Unfortunately, your choice has disappointed me. Zhuowen continued to speak. Although Country F's language was different from Huaxia's, Zhuowen had already flipped through Country F's language dictionary before coming to Country F. It only took him a few minutes to master Country F's language. Chapter 2660. Uncovering the Stalker. Duterte hurriedly presented the Kunlun jade pillar with both hands and said with a trembling voice, "Immortal Master, this is the Kunlun jade pillar. I didn't know about it because I didn't receive Elder Chen's message. Now, I finally know that this Kunlun jade pillar belongs to you." Zhuowen sneered in his heart. He knew that Duterte was lying through his teeth when he saw his expression. If Elder Chen didn't inform Duterte, how could Duterte muster so many people to carry out the drill? Zhuowen took the Kunlun jade pillar, and a surge of energy immediately gushed out. Duterte screamed and smashed into the wall behind him. He was dead. Zhuowen's gaze was cold. He didn't even look at Duterte. When Duterte wanted to kill him, he was already a dead man in Zhuowen's heart. "Let's go." Zhuowen took the Kunlun jade pillar and ignored Elder Chen and the others who were petrified. Instead, he walked straight out of the presidential palace. Not long after they walked out of the presidential palace, Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and the huge presidential palace behind him collapsed. The moment the presidential palace collapsed, the entire country of Country F was in chaos. "Sir, our private jet has been destroyed. How do we return to Huaxia next?" Elder Chen asked cautiously. "Just follow me." Zhuowen waved his sleeve again. Elder Chen and the others felt the world spin. When they came to their senses, they found themselves standing on the top floor of the Realm Night Group. Is this teleportation? In just a short while, we left Country F and came to Jinling? Elder Chen and the others looked out through the transparent glass. When they found that the scenery outside was indeed the Jinling city in their memories, the fear in their hearts reached its peak. Teleportation was already an immortal's ability. However, When they thought of the various supernatural powers that Zhuowen had shown before, Elder Chen and the others felt that it was reasonable. They were even more in awe of Zhuowen. I'll stay with the Realm Knight group for the time being. Once I've collected all the Kunlun Jade pillars, I'll naturally leave. Zhuowen glanced at Old Chen. After saying this, he entered the Realm Knight group, randomly chose the most spacious room, and went into seclusion. Of course, Zhuowen was not really in seclusion. Instead, he planned to use this time to find the other 13 Kunlun Jade pillars. When he scanned China, he had already confirmed the location of the 13 Kunlun Jade pillars. Now that he had found the Kunlun Jade pillar in Country F, the other 13 Kunlun Jade pillars would be much easier. Of course, Zhuowen did not plan to search for them himself. Instead, he sent Bloodscale to search for the 13 Kunlun Jade pillars. He planned to spend the rest of his time on Earth as an ordinary person. For the rest of the time, Zhuowen was like an ordinary young man. He went shopping, watched movies, or entertained himself. It was as if Zhuowen had really become an ordinary person. Finally, on the third day, Bloodscale came back with the 13 Kunlun Jade pillars. When the 15 Kunlun Jade pillars were suspended side by side in front of Zhuowen, they emitted a blazing jade-colored light. Immediately, the 15 Kunlun Jade pillars merged together, forming a thicker and longer jade pillar. This jade pillar was exactly the same as the one in the green-haired mummy's hand. I finally found the second jade pillar. It seems that we can go to Kunlun Mountain now. The green-haired mummy's eyes flickered with anticipation. The next day, Zhuowen left a bottle of elixir for Old Chen and the others and left Jinling City without saying goodbye. Of course, with their speed, they arrived at Kunlun Mountain in an instant. Kunlun Mountain was the first sacred mountain in China's legends. Since ancient times, there were many myths and legends about Kunlun Mountain. Kunlun Mountain was also known as the ancestor of the dragon veins. When Zhuowen arrived at Kunlun Mountain and saw the majestic and vast mountain range in the northwest of China, his eyes narrowed. This was because he felt a trace of energy in the Kunlun mountain range. This energy was not the energy of the stars, but an energy that was of a higher level than the energy of the stars. Heavenly Path's origin energy. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with shock. In the Kunlun mountain range, there was actually Heavenly Path's origin energy that was of a higher level than the energy of the stars. Moreover, this was only a planet. It was undoubtedly unbelievable. You felt it too, right? There is definitely Heavenly Path's origin energy in the Kunlun mountain range. It's just a planet. And I think that other than the land of origin, I can't think of any other place that has Heavenly Path's origin energy, the green-haired mummy said calmly. Previously, this fellow had sneaked out alone and came to Mount Kunlun several times. When he realized that he couldn't open the restriction around Mount Kunlun with just one jade pillar, he came back to help Zhuowen collect the Kunlun jade pillars. Of course, Zhuowen knew that if a single jade pillar could open the seal around Kunlun Mountain, this guy would definitely enter Kunlun Mountain alone. He would definitely not leave any benefits for Zhuowen. Kid, before we open the seal, I think we should work together to find the two stalkers behind us. Just as Zhuowen was about to enter Kunlun Mountain, the green-haired mummy suddenly spoke. Zhuowen's eyes were filled with doubt, and his expression changed slightly. Along the way, he basically did not find any signs of being followed. The green-haired mummy sneered and said coldly to somewhere behind him, "Do you want me to find you? Or do you want to come out on your own?" Zhuowen followed the gaze of the green-haired mummy and fell on a mountain behind them. His eyes were filled with doubt. He did not feel that the mountain was unusual, and his divine sense did not detect anything hidden in the mountain. However, Zhuowen soon discovered that two wriggling human figures had appeared on the surface of the mountain. Soon after, the wriggling human figures became more and more awake. In the end, they transformed into a woman in a Cheongsam and a steel giant. These two people were Fire Plume and Steel Plume of the Purple Red House, who had been following Zhuowen and the others. At this moment, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were also looking at the green-haired mummy with a strange expression. The concealment talisman they used was extremely advanced. Even a second step, Dao confirming expert, might not be able to detect them. However, the green-haired mummy actually discovered them. And from the looks of it, it should have discovered them a long time ago. Why are you two following us? After Zhuowen discovered the two people, his face suddenly became gloomy, and at the same time, he was a little vigilant. He knew that these two people must have been following them for a long time, but he did not notice them at all. It was likely that these two people had used some kind of extremely powerful concealment method. Chapter 2661. Kunlun the green-haired corpse shrugged and said, "Why are you looking at me like that? I just found out too." Zhuowen naturally wouldn't believe the green-haired corpse's nonsense. Instead, he looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and continued, "You too, why have you been following me for so long?" After saying this, Zhuowen's eyes were filled with killing intent as he stared at Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Fire Plume frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Brother Zhua, we're actually looking for you to cooperate. Are you looking for the origin ground?" Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He didn't expect Fire Plume to know about the origin ground. Seeing Zhuowen fall silent, Hui Yu continued, "Actually, it's like this. The news of the land of origin has already spread like wildfire in the Xian Mi heavenly domain. You might not know this, but most of the cultivators here are actually here for the land of origin. And more cultivators will come because the origin ground is in your 8 heavenly regions." Zhuowen frowned and said, "How did your Xian Mi heavenly region know about the origin ground in the 8 heavenly regions?" Fire Plume said indifferently, "Blood Prison's Shui Wuhan provided the information. After he returned to the Xian Mi heavenly region, he spread the news of the origin ground and attracted the attention of many cultivators." Fire Plume continued, "Don't worry, as long as you let us enter the origin ground, we definitely won't reveal this place. Of course, if you're not willing, then I can only spread the news." "You dare?" the green-haired corpse said coldly, his killing intent soaring to the sky. Steel Plume and Fire Plume's pupils shrank at the same time after sensing the terrifying killing intent of the green-haired corpse. They didn't expect the green-haired corpse to be so terrifying that it could release such a terrifying killing intent. "If you really want to make a move, I don't mind spreading the news. I don't think you guys are that impulsive. Letting the two of us in is better than letting a group of outsiders in," Steel Plume suddenly said. "Let them in," Zhuowen said. Zhuowen could sense that Steel Plume wasn't simple. At the very least, he wasn't confident that he could kill the two of them before they spread the news. Moreover, he didn't think that the green-haired corpse could do it either. Although this guy was full of killing intent and looked very strong, he was actually a paper tiger. After all, this guy's strength had dropped too much. Now, he was only on par with Zhuowen's 2-star Pangu sacred body. Humph! This time, this guy is the one making the decision. Since he has agreed, I have no objections. Otherwise, I would have killed you 2 ants long ago. Under Zhuowen's strange gaze, the green-haired corpse pretended to cast a sidelong glance at Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Immediately, it slowly withdrew the killing intent on its body. Steel Plume and Fire Plume naturally didn't know the details of the green-haired corpse. Seeing that the green-haired corpse had withdrawn its killing intent, the two of them finally felt relieved. "You should pay a price. Do you want us to take you in for free?" Zhuowen suddenly said coldly. Fire Plume smiled. She had already expected this. With a wave of her hand, she took out a jade slip and threw it to Zhuowen. This is... Zhuowen frowned slightly. This is the first 2 moves of the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Fire Plume said lightly. Zhuowen was stunned. He checked it with his divine sense and revealed a look of ecstasy. You actually have the complete tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Zhuowen said happily. The tyrannical Dao slaying technique had a total of 3 moves. The first move was the slaughtering Dao finger. Zhuowen had already cultivated it to the peak. 1 finger was enough to kill an ordinary heavenly Dao master. The second move was the slaughtering Dao palm. It was said that it could kill an ordinary heavenly Dao master. The third move was the slaughtering Dao hand. It was the most powerful move. When cultivated to the peak, it could kill a heavenly Dao master. Fire Plume and Steel Plume looked at Zhuowen strangely as he treated the tyrannical Dao slaying technique like a treasure. To be honest, although the tyrannical Dao slaying technique was much more powerful than an ordinary Dao technique, it was an existence that could be found at a roadside stall in the Xianmi heavenly territory. The main reason was that the tyrannical Dao slaying technique could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master. After a cultivator attained Dao, he naturally needed to cultivate a corresponding Dao technique. The higher the level of the Dao technique, the better. A Dao technique like the tyrannical Dao slaying technique, which could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master, was disdained by most cultivators in the Xianmi heavenly territory. This was because once a Dao technique was cultivated, it was very difficult to change to another Dao technique. The gains did not make up for the losses. Once a Dao technique was chosen, it naturally had to be perfect. For example, the tyrannical Dao slaying technique only had 3 moves. It could only be cultivated to the heavenly Dao master. This cultivator would be delusional if he wanted to step into the second step of Dao validation. Even though the tyrannical Dao slaying technique was indeed powerful, not many people were willing to cultivate such a Dao technique. Of course, there were people who cultivated the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Generally, in the Xianmi heavenly territory, it was the itinerant cultivators who were struggling and had no choice but to choose to cultivate the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. This was the first time Fire Plume had seen someone so ecstatic after obtaining the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Fire Plume wanted to remind him, but was stopped by Steel Plume. Zhuowen obviously did not know the flaws of the tyrannical Dao slaying technique. Now that they could use this tyrannical Dao slaying technique to exchange for entering the land of origin, it would be best. Otherwise, Zhuowen would definitely ask for an exorbitant price, which would not be good for them. Fire Plume also thought of this, and nodded silently. However, looking at Zhuowen's ecstatic expression, he felt a little pity in his heart. Zhuowen put away the jade slip and nodded to Fire Plume with satisfaction. Okay, this thing happens to be what I need. I won't take anything else from you. Next, Zhuowen and the others began to rush towards the Kunlun Mountains. Soon, under the guidance of the green-haired corpse, the group stopped in a canyon in the deepest part of the Kunlun Mountains. This canyon was surrounded by mountains. White snow drifted down, creating a world of ice and snow. Green Hat, is the entrance you mentioned last time here? Zhuowen asked. The green-haired corpse nodded and immediately came to the center of the canyon. In the center of the canyon, there was a rock that was about 10 feet tall. This rock was extremely irregular and looked strange. And strangely, in this snowy canyon, there was no snow on the surface of the rock. It was really strange. The green-haired corpse took out 2 jade pillars and immediately cleared the snow under the rock. Then Zhuowen saw that there were 2 grooves below that could fit the 2 jade pillars. The moment the jade pillars were inserted into the grooves, the entire Kunlun Mountains began to shake. Chapter 2662. Extreme Blade Array. The abyss was extremely deep and bottomless. Whether it was steel plume, fire plume, or blood scale, their divine senses could not see what was inside the abyss. Only Zhuowen and the green-haired mummy frowned the moment the abyss appeared. Zhuowen's divine soul had been improved by the Panga banner and had become extremely powerful. Because his divine soul was too powerful, Zhuowen could only mobilize a part of its divine soul power. Zhuowen knew very well that his current strength was too weak. Although his divine soul had been modified to become extremely powerful, it was a pity that he could only use a part of its divine soul power. However, he believed that as his strength slowly increased, the amount of divine soul power he could use would naturally rise as well. It was this powerful divine soul that made Zhuowen aware of the horror in the abyss. He could vaguely feel that there was an extremely powerful rule power in the abyss. If he fell in, he would be seriously injured, even if he did not die. This feeling shocked Zhuowen. His current doppelganger had cultivated the 2-star Pangu sacred body. Its physical body was extremely tough and powerful. Even Lord Hunyuan might not necessarily be able to defeat him. However, there was a force in the abyss that made him feel the threat of death. This showed how terrifying and powerful the force in the abyss was. Zhuowen glanced at the expressions of the others and found that Fire Plume, Bloodscale, and Steel Plume were at a loss. Obviously, the three of them did not feel that there was anything wrong with the abyss below. The green-haired mummy also had a dignified look. Obviously, like Zhuowen, they had also discovered the difference in the abyss. Is this the entrance to the land of origin? Fire Plume looked at the dark abyss below her and frowned slightly. Yes, but this abyss is very dangerous. Zhuowen nodded and immediately looked at the green-haired mummy. He asked in a deep voice, "Green Hat, what kind of power exists in the abyss?" I think that even second-step Dao confirming cultivators might fall into this abyss. The moment he said that, Fire Plume and the other two were shocked. Fire Plume said in disbelief, "Are you trying to scare me?" "Oh, if you don't believe me, you can go in and feel it for yourself." Zhuowen mocked. Fire Plume stomped her foot, her face flushed red with anger. She said coldly, "Let's go in then." However, just as Fire Plume wanted to go in and try, he was stopped by Steel Plume. "Miss, please be careful. Let's try using a substitute puppet first," Steel Plume said. Fire Plume calmed down. She had been angry just now, but now that she had calmed down, she knew that she had been too impulsive. Although she and Steel Plume didn't find anything dangerous in the abyss, they still had to be cautious. Fire Plume took out a puppet from her spirit ring. This puppet was made of straw and was no different from an ordinary puppet. Zhuowen was surprised. He sensed a Taoist rhyme aura from this straw puppet. Moreover, this Taoist rhyme aura also contained a trace of vitality. The moment Fire Plume activated the puppet, the vitality hidden in the Taoist rhyme bloomed like 100 flowers and became more and more exuberant. In the end, the puppet actually stood up like a living person. Although this puppet was only the size of a palm, the aura on its body was extremely powerful. Zhuowen estimated that this puppet should have the strength of a half-step heavenly Tao master. It could be said that this kind of thing was basically an invincible existence in the 8 heavens. However, in Fire Plume's hands, it was just a puppet that was like a toy. It was obvious how rich Fire Plume was. After Fire Plume left her divine sense on the puppet, it stood up as if it had come to life. Then it jumped out and entered the abyss. Soon, Fire Plume spat out a mouthful of blood. Her beautiful eyes revealed a look of horror. "Miss, what's wrong?" Steel Plume's expression changed. There is a terrifying force in this abyss. The puppet was blasted to pieces by this force when it entered about 1,000 meters. Fire Plume's face was gloomy. Then she looked coldly at Zhuowen. However, she couldn't say anything. After all, Zhuowen had already warned her that this abyss was not simple. It was just that she didn't believe him. However, Fire Plume found it strange that Zhuowen knew that this abyss was not simple. After all, she and Steel Plume had used their divine senses to explore this abyss. However, they didn't find anything wrong with this abyss. What they didn't know was that Zhuowen's divine sense was much stronger than theirs. At a glance, he could see that there was a powerful concealment array inside this abyss. This concealment array just happened to conceal that force. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't be able to detect that such a terrifying force existed in the abyss. This force is too terrifying. Steel Plume, even if you go in, I think it will be very difficult. Your life might even be in danger, Fire Plume said in a deep voice. Steel Plume's expression changed slightly. He could see that Fire Plume was extremely afraid of the force in the abyss. Then what should we do? Steel Plume asked worriedly. Fire Plume also looked at the green-haired corpse. Just now, when Zhuowen discovered that something was wrong with the abyss, he immediately asked the green-haired corpse. Obviously, this green-haired corpse wasn't as simple as it appeared to be. The green-haired corpse said indifferently, "This is the extreme blade array at the entrance of the land of origin. It's a Genesis grade array. I don't know which little guys set it up back then." What? A Genesis grade array? Fire Plume, Steel Plume, and Bloodscale cried out in shock at the same time. Their voices were full of disbelief. Even Zhuowen was shocked by this. He was no longer the newbie from before. He had a certain understanding of the Tao validation stage. A Genesis grade array could already trap a god of creation, and a god of creation was a genuine third-step Tao validation stage mighty figure. Such a powerful being could kill any one of them with a flick of his finger. According to what you said, if it's a Genesis grade array, we won't be able to enter at all. Zhuowen said with a frown. He knew that the green-haired corpse was determined to obtain the terrain of the land of origin. There was no way it wouldn't think of a way. Moreover, he also knew that the green-haired corpse's origins were mysterious. It knew much more about the land of origin than he did, so it definitely had a way to deal with this. This array is much weaker than before, but it's still very powerful. If you want me to force my way in, I might be able to force my way in, but you guys, the green-haired corpse looked at Zhuowen, Fire Plume, and the others with a disdainful smile. Fire Plume was infuriated. However, when it thought of the powerful murderous aura that the green-haired corpse had just released, it could only swallow its anger. Zhuowen chuckled coldly in his mind. Of course, Zhuowen knew that the green-haired corpse's physical body was extremely tough. However, he also knew that this guy's power had greatly decreased. Even if they could force their way in, they wouldn't be able to gain anything. He definitely had another way. But I still have a way. Chapter 2663. The Origin entranceuan was stunned. He glanced at the green-haired mummy. He was wondering why the mummy had been following him ever since he left the ominous vein. It turned out that it wanted to make use of his Panga banner. However, he still asked skeptically, "Are you sure that the Panga banner can weaken the power of this formation? You should know that I don't know how to use it at all." The green-haired mummy said indifferently, "You're too weak. It's wishful thinking if you want to use the Panga banner. However, the Panga banner has acknowledged you. You have the aura of the Panga banner on you. This extreme blade formation won't harm you at all." Zhuowen frowned. Although he was puzzled, he could tell that the mummy didn't seem to be lying to him. With that thought, Zhuowen looked at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and said, We have a way to enter the abyss. However, if you want to follow us in, you'll have to pay a price. Fire Plume stomped her feet in anger. She felt that Zhuowen was too shameless. He was actually bargaining again. Tell me, what do you want? Fire Plume said coldly, I'm very interested in pills and formations. I don't know if you have any books on these two fields. The higher the level, the better. Zhuowen rubbed his hands and said he had inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's knowledge of alchemy. In fact, it was very easy for him to become a heavenly Tao alchemist. However, he didn't have the corresponding pill recipes. If he had also inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's memories, perhaps he wouldn't have to worry about pill recipes. Unfortunately, he had only inherited the Pill Emperor Flame's knowledge. This was what made Zhuowen the most speechless. He had a lifetime of knowledge, but he didn't have any pill recipes to practice on. What a scam! Moreover, his formation skills had already reached the pinnacle of the 9th level. As long as he had the corresponding books on formations, it wouldn't be too much of a problem for him to break through to the Heavenly Tao Divine Formation Master level. Books on alchemy and array formation? You're also a pill master and array master? Fire Plume asked suspiciously. Zhuowen admitted that he was a 9th grade alchemist and a god formation master. It was only because the 8 heavens didn't have any higher grade books in this field that he hadn't successfully broken through yet. I do have some basic pill Tao and array Tao manuals on me. Before Fire Plume could finish speaking, he was interrupted by Zhuowen, who said, I need high-grade records of alchemy and formations. If it's from a street stall, then forget it. Fire Plume was furious, but there was nothing she could do. She frowned and took out a golden book from her spirit ring. This is the highest level alchemy book I have on me. As for the Tao of Arrays, it's only a basic book. If you're still not satisfied, then I can't do anything about it. Miss, this alchemy book is Steel Plume's expression changed slightly, but he was stopped by Fire Plume. Zhuowen could tell that this alchemy book was extraordinary from Steel Plume's expression. He took the alchemy book, flipped through it casually, and was immediately engrossed in it. This was because the alchemy book was filled with all kinds of pill recipes. It could be said that there were hundreds of different styles and varieties. Most of the pill recipes for the first step of Tao validation were recorded in it. With this alchemy book, it really wasn't difficult for Zhuowen to refine heavenly Tao, primordial Tao, and mixed essence divine pills. As for the array Tao manual that Fire Plume gave him, although it was very basic, it could still help him break through to the heavenly Tao divine master level. There were also many heavenly Tao divine arrays listed in it. Of course, if Zhuowen wanted to continue breaking through in the future, he would naturally need to find higher grade books. Let's go, follow behind me. After putting away the alchemy book with satisfaction, Zhuowen waved at Fire Plume and Steel Plume and directly entered the abyss. Hey, you're going in just like that. Aren't you afraid of death? Fire Plume asked in horror. Just follow me. If you don't believe me, then don't come in. After saying that, Zhuowen plunged into the abyss. The green-haired mummy and blood scale naturally followed without hesitation. Fire Plume's expression was uncertain, but in the end, she still followed behind Zhuowen. However, Fire Plume and Steel Plume were extremely cautious and kept a distance from Zhuowen. They knew that an extremely terrifying force would appear about 1,000 meters deep in the abyss. At that time, she wanted to see how Zhuowen would block that terrifying force. Soon, the group entered 1,000 meters deep into the abyss. The instant Zhuowen entered the 1,000-meter radius, he felt that vast power form a terrifying pressure that squeezed his entire body. It was as if his entire body was going to be flattened. Just as Zhuowen couldn't bear the pressure, and was about to be annihilated by it, the Panga banner in his divine soul emitted an invisible ripple. Then, an inexplicable vacuum formed around Zhuowen. Zhuowen heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that the green-haired mummy was right. The Panga banner was indeed able to restrain this terrifying force. The green-haired mummy and Bloodscale also entered Zhuowen's side. After seeing that Zhuowen and the other two were safe and sound, Fireplume was first shocked, then she heaved a sigh of relief and followed Zhuowen. Then, the group went deeper into the abyss. Half a day later, they found a black whirlpool at the bottom. This whirlpool was formed by rotating in the void. It was like a deep black mouth that could swallow everything in the world. "Let's go in," the green-haired mummy said. Zhuowen and the others didn't hesitate and immediately entered the whirlpool. Zhuowen only felt that the world was spinning, then he lost consciousness. When Zhuowen woke up, he found that he was in a natural cave. At the front of the cave was an extremely magnificent bronze gate. Countless strange beasts were carved on the bronze gate, and these strange beasts were worshipping the 12 statues at the top of the gate. Zhuowen was no stranger to one of the 12 statues. It was Zhurong, one of the 12 ancestors of sorcerers. After fusing with the Zhurong goo, he was naturally no stranger to Zhurong's image. Since Zhurong appeared among the 12 statues, they should be the statues of the 12 ancestors of sorcerers. Zhuowen looked around and found that the green-haired mummy Bloodscale and the other 3 were not here. He knew that after entering the black whirlpool, they should have been transmitted to this place separately. This should be the place of origin. What a strange place. It looks like an ordinary cave, but why does it give me a feeling of being in a vast starry sky? Zhuowen muttered in a low voice and came in front of the bronze gate. The bronze gate was so big that Zhuowen was like an ant in front of it. Moreover, the bronze gate was tightly shut, and Zhuowen's divine sense was blocked by the gate. Zhuowen tried to push the bronze gate, but found that it was like an ant trying to shake a tree. The Panga banner is moving. Just as Zhuowen was sighing dejectedly, the Panga banner in his divine soul suddenly stirred. Chapter 26:64. A bountiful harvest creek, with a gentle wave of the Panga banner, the originally motionless bronze door slowly opened to both sides. The moment the bronze door opened a crack, Zhuowen went in, and the Panga banner returned to Zhuowen's spirit. However, a path inexplicably appeared in Zhuowen's mind. At the end of this path, there was a stone floating on an altar. Zhuowen knew that this was the image sent to him by the Panga banner. It should be that the Panga banner needed this stone, but he didn't know what it was. Something that the Panga banner was thinking about was definitely not a simple stone. This origin ground should be related to Pangu. Otherwise, the Panga banner wouldn't be so excited. Zhuowen quietly pondered for a while, then followed the path given to him by the Panga banner and walked forward. This was a huge natural square. On both sides of the square, there were rather rough stone sculptures. These stone sculptures were extremely ancient. There were old and young men and women. Some of them were holding ancient bamboo slips and reading seriously. Some were looking up at the sky with their hands behind their backs. Some were wearing armor and looked heroic. Moreover, Zhuowen found that behind each stone sculpture there was a secret door. Of course, these secret doors were very hidden. If Zhuowen didn't get the path given to him by the Panga banner, he wouldn't have been able to see them. There were more than 30 secret doors here. The moment Zhuowen opened the first secret door, he was immediately stunned, because inside this secret door there were actually all divine medicines with astonishing medicinal effects. Moreover, these divine medicines were all Tao-proving divine medicines. Most of them were heavenly Tao divine medicines, and a few were primordial Tao divine medicines. After opening the second secret door, Zhuowen was even more shocked. This was because this secret door also contained divine medicines. Furthermore, the divine medicines were of a higher grade than the first secret door. They were all primordial Tao level divine medicines, and there were even a small number of primordial chaos level divine medicines mixed in. Zhuowen opened one secret door after another and found that each secret door contained a corresponding Tao-proving divine medicine. Of course, there were high and low levels of divine medicines in the secret doors. Zhuowen even found a second-step Tao-proving divine medicine in one of the secret doors. This is, when Zhuowen opened the last secret door, he was stunned. There was only one divine medicine in this secret door, but its medicinal efficacy was much more powerful than all the other secret doors he had found before. This was a very ordinary stalk of grass, but this stalk of grass contained a terrifying medicinal power. This medicinal power formed a powerful current that flowed upwards like a countercurrent. As the medicinal power flowed, Zhuowen seemed to see an illusory world within the flowing medicinal power. This is definitely a divine medicine that is beyond the second step Tao-proving divine medicine. Zhuowen guessed in his heart, but he had already pounced forward to grab the divine grass and put it into his spirit ring. At first, this divine medicine sensed that Zhuowen wanted to escape. However, because of the aura of the Pangu banner on Zhuowen's body, the divine medicine was suppressed and Zhuowen easily caught it. If other cultivators had come, they would not have been able to catch this divine medicine at all. After all, this divine medicine had a spirit, and its ability to escape was unparalleled. Unfortunately, it had met Zhuowen, who had the Pangu banner. Zhuowen could not suppress the excitement in his heart. He had never thought that he would be able to obtain so many divine medicines at once. Moreover, each of them was of such a high level. If the outside world knew that Zhuowen had obtained a divine medicine, it would definitely cause a stir among countless forces and cause many forces to arrest Zhuowen. Not to mention that Zhuowen had first step and second step Tao proving divine medicines. Just the fact that Zhuowen had obtained a third step Tao proving divine medicine was enough to cause an unprecedented sensation. It was enough to alarm the Xian Mi Heaven Domain's Tao Palace forces. Of course, Zhuowen would not leak these things unless he had a death wish. As expected of the place of origin, there are so many divine medicines. Zhuowen left the square with excitement in his heart. Now, he found that the route given to him by the Pangu banner was the best one. He basically did not encounter any obstacles or terrifying traps along the way. The whole way was unimpeded, and every time he arrived at a place, he would discover more or less. A Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine, and it's a special class Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine. When Zhuowen accidentally dug up a Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine, he was completely stunned. It was not that he had never obtained special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals before, but when he saw an entire special class Heavenly Tao Origin Crystal Mine, even Zhuowen, who had a strong heart, was dumbfounded. It should be known that ordinary first-step Tao validation cultivators could not even take out a special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystal, let alone an entire special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystal mine. The value of this special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystal mine was probably comparable to that of a Tao Palace faction. After storing a large pile of special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals, Zhuowen found that his spirit ring was almost full. Only then did he stop collecting special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystals. With reluctance, Zhuowen could only leave the special class Heavenly Tao Origin crystal mine and continue forward. Finally, Zhuowen arrived at the end of the route. It was a huge altar. The entire altar was square, tens of thousands of square meters in size. The altar was made of white jade. At the front of the altar stood a sundial. Behind the sundial was an altar with 10,000 steps. At the top of the altar was a large bronze cauldron. Above the cauldron floated a very ordinary stone. This stone was almost exactly the same as an ordinary stone. The only difference was that the surface of this stone was engraved with complicated patterns. Moreover, Zhuowen found that these patterns were like the pulse of a human body. They were pulsating on the surface of the stone, emitting a 7-colored light with every pulse. What kind of stone is this? Zhuowen looked at the strange stone above the cauldron in shock. He was extremely shocked. The Panga banner in Zhuowen's divine soul suddenly became agitated. Then it started to sway in his divine soul like a lively child. "You want that stone?" Zhuowen asked subconsciously. However, after realizing that this Panga banner was not alive, he laughed at himself in his heart. But he soon found that the Panga banner in his spirit actually nodded like a human. Zhuowen thought for a while and finally walked to the top of the altar. When he arrived in front of the main hall, the first thing he looked at was not the stone above the cauldron, but the sundial at the front. The sundial was tilted 45 degrees, facing the altar. Zhuowen found that the thin black needles on the sundial were spinning rapidly. Moreover, they were spinning faster and faster. It was as if time was flying at this moment. Chapter 26:65. Profound meaning in the image. There was a vast and boundless starry sky. This starry sky was cold and lonely without any stars. Zhuowen knew that this should be the initial starry sky when Pangu had just split open the chaos. In the center of this starry sky, there was a huge figure that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was Pangu. Panga's body was collapsing. His essence blood turned into 12 beams of bloody light and shot in all directions. His primordial spirit turned into 3 beams of green light and escaped into the void. Panga's flesh and blood spilled in all directions, turning into sparkling stars that filled the sky. Among the countless stars, Zhuowen saw a stone shoot out of Panga's heart. This stone emitted a 7-colored light. "Is that Panga's heart?" Zhuowen guessed. The image came to an abrupt end when the 7-colored stone shot out of Guexian's mouth. Zhuowen tried to touch the 7-colored stone with his hand, but he was bounced back by an invisible force when he was 1 foot away. After several attempts, Zhuowen gave up on this method. Instead, he controlled the Panga banner to approach the 7-colored stone. Although he could not fully control the Panga banner, it was not difficult for him to move it. The moment the Panga banner approached the 7-colored stone, the 7-colored lines on the stone's surface shot into the Panga banner like rainbow-colored veins. The Panga banner emitted a strange buzzing sound. Zhuowen clearly felt the joy of the Panga banner from this buzzing sound. Crack! 2 hours later, the 7-colored lines on the 7-colored stone in front of the Panga banner completely dimmed, then turned into countless fine powder. Zhuowen knew that all the energy of this stone should be condensed in the 7-colored lines on its surface. When all the energy of the lines was absorbed by the Panga banner, this stone was no different from an ordinary stone. This is, after completely absorbing the energy of the 7-colored stone, Zhuowen found that the wide surface of the Panga banner had changed a lot. Originally, the banner should have drawn the image of Pangu holding the heaven-splitting double axes. Now, Zhuowen found 4 words at the 4 corners of Panga's image. The 4 words at the 4 corners of the banner were break, erect, prohibit, and destroy. The image of Pangu seemed to have materialized much clearer than before. Also, Zhuowen found that the image of Pangu on the banner was more vivid and full of spirituality than before. For example, if the previous image of Pangu was an ordinary black and white painting, then the current image of Panga's image of Pangu was a colorful painting with additional colors. Profound? The moment the 4 words appeared on the banner, a corresponding message appeared in the depths of Zhuowen's mind. This message introduced the meaning of the 4 words. From the information in his mind, Zhuowen knew that the 4 words represented the 4 powerful, profound meanings contained in the Panga banner. They were created by Pangu when he was born. Among the 4 profound meanings, the break profound meaning was the sky-splitting blade. The erect profound meaning was the creation mysterious light. The prohibit profound meaning was the infinite primordial chaos. And the destroy profound meaning was the death of heaven and earth. These 4 profound meanings all had the power to destroy heaven and earth, and they could only be displayed through the Panga banner. Moreover, the 4 profound meanings had completely different abilities. For example, the sky-splitting blade was the break profound meaning, which could tear the chaos, split time and space, and open up the infinite world. The create mysterious light was the erect profound meaning, which could be divided into yin and yang, the 5 elements, and give birth to the infinite earth, water, fire, and wind. The infinite primordial chaos was the restrict profound meaning, which could create chaos, cover up the universe, and create the infinite chaotic world. The death of heaven and earth was the destroy profound meaning, which could destroy heaven and earth, ancient and modern, and destroy countless worlds. Zhuowen thought for a moment and roughly understood the functions and effects of these 4 profound meanings. However, Zhuowen also knew that it was still a little difficult for him to use the 4 great profundities. Of course, Zhuowen also knew that once these 4 profound meanings were successfully displayed, their power would definitely be extraordinary. Moreover, Zhuowen was most surprised by the Panga banner's materialized image of Pangu. He knew that the Panga banner's biggest gain after absorbing the colorful stone was not the 4 profound meanings, but the materialized image of Pangu. From the message transmitted by the Panga banner, he knew that the Pangu pattern was actually the Pangu shadow, the ultimate profound meaning of the Panga banner. It was said that as long as one could activate the power of the Panga banner, they could summon the Panga shadow and display the supreme power of Pangu. However, this profound meaning was the ultimate profound meaning of the Panga banner, and the requirements were extremely harsh. At the very least, one had to have a 7-star Pangu sacred body to be qualified to display it. If one's strength did not reach the 7-star Panga sacred body, it was said that if one forcibly displayed the ultimate profound meaning of the Panga shadow, one's body and soul would be destroyed. As for the other 4 profound meanings, the requirements were relatively lax. As long as one could condense the Pangu's sacred body, they would be qualified to display the profound meanings. Moreover, as the Pangu's sacred body became stronger, the power of the 4 profound meanings would also become stronger. Now that he had activated these 4 profound meanings, whether it was his original body or his doppelganger, as long as he had the Panga banner in his hand, he could use them. Of course, the ultimate profound meaning of the Panga shadow could only be displayed after he condensed a Panga sacred body and reached the 7-star Panga sacred body. Boom, boom. Suddenly, an ear-piercing roar came from the passage north of the altar. Zhuowen's eyes flickered, and he jumped down and rushed to the north. As soon as he entered the passage, Zhuowen found that there were countless black shadows flashing in the passage. Every black shadow had a pair of blood-red eyes, which were staring at Zhuowen greedily. Zhuowen spread out his divine sense and recognized the true faces of these black shadows. They were bats, half the size of a man, hanging upside down in the air above the passage. Now that Zhuowen had suddenly entered the passage, he immediately awakened these bats. Then, the passage was filled with the sound of flapping wings. Then, these bats roared and rushed toward Zhuowen, trying to devour him. Zhuowen snorted coldly and immediately drew his sacrificial death sword. Blade after blade of death light flashed and slammed into the bodies of the countless bats in the surroundings. Sizzle! 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 The bats were all blown away by the sacrifice of death sword. However, what made Zhuowen frown was that these strange bats had thick skin. The sacrifice of death sword did not cause much damage to them. Zhuowen's attack had naturally angered this group of bats. These bats let out even more ear-piercing roars. The sound waves were like ripples gathering in Zhuowen's ears. Even Zhuowen felt an extremely uncomfortable buzzing sound in his ears. It was as if countless drums were beating next to his ears. Zhuowen snorted, and his powerful divine sense burst out like ripples. He immediately used the soul kill. Then, Zhuowen was surprised to find that the huge bats around him were like mice that had encountered a cat. They let out sounds of horror, and all fell to the ground. Chapter 26:66. Flaming Zhuowen looked at this scene strangely, and soon realized that it was his spiritual sense that caused all this. To be more precise, it was the aura of the Panga banner in his spirit. After his spirit was transformed by the Panga banner, every time he used his spiritual sense, it would carry the ancient aura of the Panga banner. These bats were not afraid of Zhuowen's powerful spiritual sense, but the ancient aura carried by Zhuowen's spiritual sense. After figuring out this connection, Zhuowen used his spiritual sense to form a veil that covered the surface of his body. Then, like a gust of wind, he rushed into the depths of the passage. Although he could kill all the bats here if he continued to use soul kill, it would consume a lot of his energy. Moreover, his spiritual sense found that there were more bats in this passage than the ones in front of him. There were more ahead. If he had to kill them one by one, how long would it take? Along the way, these strange bats were afraid of Zhuowen's spiritual sense. Although many of them were ready to attack, none of them dared to come forward. About an hour later, Zhuowen arrived at the place where the sound came from. Immediately, he found that what appeared in front of him was a huge open space. At the center of this open space was a large magma pool with an extremely high temperature. Endless waves of heat surged over like scorching tornadoes. Above the magma pool was a huge flaming bat, flapping a pair of huge flame wings on its back. This flaming bat was much larger than the bats Zhuowen had encountered along the way. It was about 30 meters in length. In particular, the aura emitted by this flaming bat was really terrifying. Zhuowen was sure that this flaming bat at least had the strength of primordial chaos lord. At this moment, in front of the flaming bat, two figures were struggling to resist the attacks of the flaming bat. These two figures were not unfamiliar to Zhuowen. They were Fire Plume and Steel Plume. Boom, boom. The flaming bat let out a shrill cry, and countless streams of lava turned into surging streams that poured down in front of Fire Feather and Steel Feather. Pucci, Fire Plume, who was holding a red feather fan, was at the end of her rope. Now that she was hit by the stream of magma, she could not hold on any longer. She spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying backward, landing not far away. Seeing this, Steel Plume roared, and his whole body erupted with a metallic luster. His originally huge body expanded several times, and he quickly waved his fists. Countless fist shadows set off a terrifying storm of Taoist rhyme. The terrifying stream of magma was blasted into countless magma droplets by the fist shadows. Steel Feather, on the other hand, used the recoil to continuously retreat. In the process of retreating, he pulled Fire Feather and retreated together. Roar! Steel Plumes, the flaming bat. Hugh's Fire Plume is me Fire Bat. The flaming bat roared at the sky, flapped its wings, and disappeared like a bolt of lightning. When it reappeared, it was already above Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Countless flames erupted from the flaming bat's body, forming an extremely solid flaming prison that enveloped Steel Plume and Fire Plume. Moreover, the flaming prison erupted with terrifying flames, like an endless rain of fire surrounding Fire Plume and Steel Plume. The flaming bat's flaming energy was extremely special and powerful. Even if Steel Plume used all his strength, he could only barely protect himself and Fire Plume. Zhuowen silently watched this scene. He could feel that the flaming bat was not to be trifled with, especially in this predicament. If Steel Plume and Fire Plume did not have a stronger trump card, the two of them would undoubtedly die. Steel Plume and Fire Plume's eyes were filled with despair. They had already used all their trump cards, but they were still no match for the flaming bat. They knew very well that when Steel Plume could not hold on, it would be their death. At the same time, Fire Plume and Steel Plume also noticed Zhuowen, who had just appeared. However, the despair in their eyes did not diminish in the slightest. In their opinion, Zhuowen's strength was on par with Steel Plume's. Even if the two of them joined forces, they were no match for the flaming bat. Zhuowen's arrival was just another death sentence. The flaming bat glanced at Zhuowen, who was not far away, with a human-like look of contempt, as if it was looking at an ant. It continued to leisurely control its flames to attack Fire Plume and Steel Plume. In the flaming bat's opinion, the human who had just appeared was simply courting death. It was not in a hurry to make a move. It planned to deal with the two ants in front of it first. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He realized that a dense swarm of bats had unknowingly gathered behind him. These bats stared coldly at Zhuowen with their scarlet eyes and blocked Zhuowen's path. Zhuowen sneered in his heart. He knew what the flaming bat was planning. Unfortunately, if the flaming bat knew that he had the Panga banner in his spirit, it would not be so careless. Zhuowen, you'd better leave quickly. You'll just lose your life if you stay. Fire Plume's voice rang in Zhuowen's mind. Zhuowen looked at the Fire Plume in the Cheongsam. He thought that Fire Plume had sent him a voice transmission to ask him to help them. He did not expect that Fire Plume wanted him to leave. Soul kill. Zhuowen took a step forward, and his powerful divine sense turned into a hurricane that swept out. Instantly, the bats behind him that were eyeing him covetously were affected by this divine sense, and they kept squeaking as they fell to the ground, twitching and struggling. Zhuowen shot out like an arrow from a bow and headed directly for the flaming bat. When the flaming bat saw that Zhuowen had actually blown away the swarm of bats with a single blow, its originally careless gaze suddenly became much more serious. Roar! The flaming bat opened its mouth and spat out a stream of flames that turned into countless spirals and shot toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen coldly snorted and immediately used the slaughtering Dao finger. Countless heavenly energy converged into a huge finger that crossed the sky and landed on the spirals of flames. However, what made Zhuowen's face turn gloomy was that when the slaughtering Dao finger blasted on the spirals of flames, it only caused the spirals of flames to stagnate for a moment before they collapsed. The slaughtering Dao finger was Zhuowen's strongest technique at present. However, it only caused the spirals of flames to stagnate for a moment before they collapsed. It could be seen that the strength of the flaming bat was far beyond Zhuowen's imagination. Soul kill. Zhuowen quickly retreated. At the same time, he used the soul kill and blasted it directly toward the flaming bat. Originally, the flaming bat wanted to follow up with another attack. However, when it felt the ancient aura of Zhuowen soul kill, it let out a sharp cry. Its body trembled, and it involuntarily took a few steps back. Zhuowen's consciousness attack did not have much effect on the flaming bat. The main thing that affected it was the ancient aura contained in the consciousness.